Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Can you hear them whispering through the walls? The question caught me off guard as I stood in the grand foyer of Ravencrest Palace. I turned to find the caretaker, Mr. Holloway, watching me with keen eyes that seemed to hold secrets from another time. "I'm sorry," I replied, adjusting the strap of my messenger bag. "Nothing, Professor Bennett. Just an old man's ramblings." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. This place gets to you after a while. As a historical architecture consultant specializing in 19th century restoration, I'd visited countless abandoned mansions and castles. But something about Ravencrest felt different from the moment I stepped through its massive oak doors. The air hung heavy with a peculiar stillness that seemed to resist my presence, as if the palace itself was holding its breath. The commission was straightforward: assess the structural integrity and historical significance of the palace for potential restoration. The generous grant from an anonymous donor had caught the attention of my department chair, who practically pushed me onto the first flight to this remote countryside estate. The East Wing is where most of the architectural elements you want to document are located, Mr. Holloway explained as we walked across the marble floor, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. That's where they held the Council of 13 in 1873. Quite the gathering of minds, so they say. I nodded, taking notes on my tablet. The diplomatic summit that never made it into the history books. Because none of them lived to tell the tale, he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had researched Ravencrest extensively before arriving, but that particular detail hadn't appeared in any of my sources. What do you mean? Mr. Holloway's weathered face tightened. All 13 diplomats were found dead the morning after their final meeting. Official records claim it was carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty heating. But locals have other theories. Such as... Instead of answering, he pointed to a grand spiral staircase. Your quarters are on the second floor. I've prepared the blue room for you. It has the best view of the grounds. He handed me an ancient iron key. Dinner is at 6 in the small dining room. I'm afraid you'll be dining alone tonight. I don't stay on the grounds after sunset. Before I could ask why, a door slammed somewhere deep within the palace. We both froze. Strange, Mr. Holloway muttered. There's no draft today. Perhaps another visitor? I suggested. No visitors. Just you. He checked his pocket watch. I should be going. The days grow short this time of year. After he departed, I stood alone in the entry hall, listening to the silence. Only it wasn't silent anymore. As I concentrated, I detected a faint, rhythmic sound, like distant footsteps moving across the floor above me. I climbed the staircase, telling myself it was just the settling of an old building. The second-floor corridor stretched before me, lined with portraits of stern-faced men in formal 19th century attire. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I made my way to the blue room. The accommodations were elegant, if slightly musty. A four-poster bed dominated the space, accompanied by antique furnishings that might have been original to the palace. Large windows overlooked manicured gardens that had seen better days, and beyond them, dense woods that appeared to press against the estate's boundaries like a dark tide. I unpacked my equipment and began reviewing the floor plans I'd been provided. According to the documentation, the East Wing contained a grand ballroom adjacent to a circular chamber where the Council of 13 had conducted their meetings. That would be my starting point tomorrow. As the afternoon light began to fade, I decided to explore a bit before dinner. The corridors were a labyrinth, and more than once I found myself retracing my steps. The palace seemed to shift around me, rooms appearing where I thought there should be none, always extending beyond what seemed logical based on the building's exterior dimensions. In one gallery, I discovered a collection of photographs from what appeared to be the infamous council meeting. 13 men sat around a large table, their expressions solemn. One photograph caught my attention, a group shot on the palace steps. I counted the figures and frowned. 14, not 13. Who was the 14th person, and why wasn't he mentioned in the historical record? A soft chime informed me it was 6 o'clock. I made my way to the small dining room, where a solitary place setting awaited me. A covered dish sat on a warming plate, alongside a bottle of wine. Mr. Holloway had prepared everything before leaving. As I ate in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every few minutes, I would pause, fork suspended midair, certain I heard something, a hushed voice, the scrape of a chair, the clink of glassware, coming from the grand dining room next door. But when I investigated, I found only darkness and dust. Returning to my meal, I noticed the temperature had dropped considerably. My breath now formed small clouds in the air. I checked the ancient radiator, but it was hot to the touch. How could it be so cold? Then I heard it clearly, a man's voice, cultured and precise, speaking as if addressing an audience. Gentlemen, we stand at the precipice of a new era. What we decide in this room will echo through generations. I dropped my fork, the clatter impossibly loud in the empty room. The voice disappeared instantly. Heart pounding, I quickly finished my dinner and retreated to my room, double-checking that the door was locked behind me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Old houses made strange noises, and my imagination, primed by Mr. Holloway's stories, was simply filling in the blanks. I worked for several hours, cataloging photographs and preparing my assessment plan for the following day. As the night deepened, so did the silence, broken only by the occasional creak of timber. Until midnight. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 12, its deep bonging reverberating through the palace. As the final note faded, I heard what sounded like dozens of voices engaged in heated debate. Though muffled, as if coming from behind thick walls, the cacophony was unmistakable. I pressed my ear against the wall. The voices grew louder, more distinct. Arguments in multiple languages, English, French, German, Russian, overlapping and intensifying. Then a bang, like a gavel striking wood, and silence fell. A single voice spoke in the quiet. The motion carries. May God forgive us for what we've set in motion. I recoiled from the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations, acoustics playing tricks, recordings planted by pranksters, my own exhaustion manifesting as auditory hallucinations. But deep down, I knew. The voices I heard belonged to men long dead, the Council of 13, reliving their final night at Ravencrest Palace. And somehow, they knew I was listening. I spent the rest of the night huddled under my blankets, listening to the walls. The voices had stopped, but something else had taken their place, the sound of footsteps, moving slowly and deliberately down the hallway toward my room. They stopped outside my door. The handle turned, slowly, though I'd locked it. I held my breath. The lock clicked. The door remained closed. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. Who disturbs our council chambers? The question drifted through my dreams, pulling me from sleep. I awoke disoriented, sunlight streaming through windows I'd failed to cover the night before. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, then the events of the previous evening came rushing back. I checked my phone, 7:32, and no signal. Not surprising given the remote location. I had slept in my clothes, too afraid to change after what I heard. Now, in the harsh light of morning, I felt foolish. Ghost stories and an overactive imagination, that's all it had been. After a quick shower, I headed downstairs. Mr. Holloway was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "Sleep well, Professor?" he asked, sliding a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. "Not particularly," I admitted. "The palace makes interesting noises at night." Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps concern. "Old buildings settle," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Tea?" While I ate, I laid out my plans for the day. "I'll start with the East Wing, the council chamber and surrounding rooms." "Do you have the keys?" Mr. Holloway hesitated. "The East Wing has been locked for renovation preparations. Perhaps you'd like to begin with the West Wing instead?" "My priority is documenting the historical significance of the council chamber," I insisted. "That's what the grant specifically mentions." He sighed, then reached into his pocket and extracted an ornate key. "Very well. But I recommend completing your work there before sunset." "Why?" "Poor lighting," he replied too quickly. "The electrical system in that section is unreliable." I took the key, noting how reluctantly he surrendered it. "I'll bring flashlights." After breakfast, I gathered my equipment, camera, measuring tools, tablet, and, as promised, 2 heavy-duty flashlights, and made my way toward the East Wing. The journey took me through a series of increasingly neglected corridors. While the main areas of Ravencrest were merely dusty, this section showed signs of abandonment, peeling wallpaper, water stains on the ceiling, cobwebs in the corners. A set of double doors marked the entrance to the East Wing. The lock was stiff, as if rarely used, but eventually yielded with a reluctant clunk. The doors swung open on protesting hinges, revealing a long gallery illuminated by tall windows draped with faded crimson curtains. The air felt different here, colder, despite the sunshine outside, and charged with a strange electricity that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. I dismissed the sensation and proceeded down the gallery, documenting architectural details as I went. At the end of the gallery, another set of doors awaited, these carved with intricate scenes depicting what appeared to be classical myths, Orpheus descending into the underworld, Persephone's abduction. Appropriate, given how entering felt like stepping into another world. Beyond lay the ballroom, a vast space with a vaulted ceiling adorned with tarnished chandeliers. Despite its dilapidated state, it retained an aura of faded grandeur. I could almost hear the swish of gowns across the parquet floor, the murmur of diplomatic conversations beneath the music of an orchestra. It was quite a sight in its day. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat. Mr. Holloway stood in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the light from the gallery. "You startle me," I said, trying to calm my racing pulse. "Apologies." He entered the ballroom, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "I came to inform you that I'll be leaving the grounds for a few hours, supply run to the village. Will you be all right on your own?" "Of course." I gestured to my equipment. "I have plenty to keep me occupied." He nodded, but lingered. "The council chamber is through that door." He pointed to an inconspicuous entrance at the far end of the ballroom. Some find it unsettling. Perhaps it would be best to work with the door open. Unsettling how? Just an old man's superstition, he said with a forced smile. Good day, Professor. After he left, I resumed my work, methodically photographing and measuring the ballroom's features. By midday, I had completed my documentation and was ready to tackle the council chamber. The door was unlocked but stuck slightly. It took a firm push to open it, releasing a puff of stale air that carried a peculiar scent, old paper, wood polish, and something else I couldn't identify, something metallic. The council chamber was smaller than I had expected, a perfect circle with a domed ceiling. A round table of dark, polished wood dominated the center, surrounded by 13 high-backed chairs, each carved with different symbols. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and between them hung portraits, the same 13 men from the photographs I'd seen the previous day. I approached the table, running my fingers over its smooth surface. Despite the layer of dust covering everything else, the table appeared recently polished. Strange. My attention was drawn to markings etched into the wood, faint symbols arranged in concentric circles around the center of the table. They didn't resemble any language I recognized, more like alchemical or astrological signs. As I leaned closer to photograph them, a chill swept through the room. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I gasped, my breath visible in the air. The sunlight streaming through the room's single window dimmed, as if a cloud had passed over the sun. Uninvited, whispered a voice directly behind me. I whirled around. The room was empty. Hello? My voice sounded small in the circular space. No response, but as I turned back to the table, I noticed something that hadn't been there before, a leather-bound journal, open to a page filled with handwritten notes and faded ink. I approached cautiously. The journal looked authentic, 19th century, but I was certain it hadn't been there moments before. I leaned in to read. Final minutes, Council of 13, October 12, 1873. The vote has been cast. May future generations understand that we acted with the best intentions, though the burden weigh heavy upon our souls. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the entry continued. He knows. God help us, he knows what we've done. The bargain is broken. I hear them coming. The entry ended in a scrawled line that trailed off the page. A noise from the ballroom made me jump, a thud, followed by the distinctive sound of footsteps. Mr. Holloway? I called, moving toward the door. No response, but the footsteps continued, slow and measured, crossing the ballroom toward the council chamber. I retreated behind the table, eyes fixed on the doorway. The footsteps stopped just outside. The air seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. A shadow fell across the threshold, a tall figure that wavered like smoke. Then it was gone, along with the shadow and the footsteps. The temperature began to rise again, sunlight returning to full strength. I looked back at the table. The journal had vanished. My hands trembled as I packed up my equipment. Whatever data I still needed, it could wait until tomorrow, preferably when Mr. Holloway was present. I had nearly reached the door when a thought stopped me cold. The photographs. I needed to check the photographs I'd taken. I scrolled through my camera's display. The ballroom shots looked normal, if a bit underexposed. Then came the council chamber, the circular room, the bookshelves, the portraits, the table. I zoomed in on the image of the table. Where my eyes had seen nothing but dust and faint etchings, the camera had captured something else, dark stains soaked into the wood in 13 distinct pools, each in front of a chair. My stomach lurched. I had to get out. Now. I fled through the ballroom, not bothering to lock the doors behind me. The galleries seemed longer on the return journey, stretching impossibly before me like a nightmare hallway that extended as I ran. When I finally burst through the double doors into the main part of the palace, I was winded and drenched in cold sweat. The grandfather clock in the hall showed 3:15. Where had the time gone? I'd entered the East Wing shortly after 9, and my documentation shouldn't have taken more than 3 hours. I retreated to my room, where I spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing my photographs and notes. The images of the staining table haunted me. What had happened in that room? Carbon monoxide wouldn't leave stains like that. By the time Mr. Holloway returned, evening had fallen. I met him in the kitchen, where he was unloading groceries. "Productive day?" he asked, his tone casual. "Mr. Holloway, what really happened to the Council of 13? His hand stilled. "I told you. Carbon monoxide. I don't believe that's the whole story." He turned to face me, expression grave. "Some stories are better left untold, Professor. Some questions better left unasked." I saw stains on the council table. Blood stains. He paled. "Impossible. That table was replaced decades ago." "What?" "After the incident, the original furniture was removed. What stands in that room now is a replica, commissioned for the palace's brief period as a museum in the 1950s. I showed him the photograph. "Then explain this." He studied the image, his face ashen. "You should leave, Professor Bennett. First thing tomorrow. I'll make the arrangements. Not until I understand what's happening here." His eyes met mine, filled with genuine fear. "You've disturbed them. They don't like to be disturbed." "Who?" "The council. They're still here, conducting their eternal meeting, debating a decision they can never unmake." A door slammed somewhere in the palace. Then another and another, a cascade of banging that moved systematically through the building like a wave. "They know we're talking about them," Mr. Holloway whispered. "They're coming." The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the kitchen windows. "What did they do?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "What was their decision?" Before he could answer, a deafening crash came from the direction of the East Wing, followed by what sounded like multiple voices raised in anger. "They've never been this active," Mr. Holloway said, fumbling for a flashlight. "Not in all my years here." "What changed?" He pointed the beam at me, illuminating my face. "You. You're the first person to enter the chamber in over a decade." The voices grew louder, no longer confined to the East Wing. They seemed to be moving throughout the palace, drawing closer. "What do they want?" I asked. "A witness," he replied. "Someone to hear their confession." The kitchen door burst open, though no one stood in the doorway. A blast of cold air extinguished Mr. Holloway's flashlight, and in the sudden darkness, I heard him whisper, "Don't listen to them, Professor. Whatever you hear, whatever they tell you, cover your ears and run." But it was too late. The voices surrounded us, a cacophony of different languages all speaking at once, growing louder until they resolved into a single phrase, repeated in unison. "The 14th member will now be recognized." I fumbled for my phone, activating its flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing an empty kitchen. Mr. Holloway was gone. Mr. Holloway? My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the pressing silence that had followed the voices. No response. Had he fled? Or had something taken him? I moved cautiously toward the door, listening intently. The palace had fallen eerily quiet, not the natural quiet of an empty building, but a deliberate, watchful silence. I could feel eyes on me from every direction. The hallway stretched before me, shadows pooling in the corners. I considered my options. I could barricade myself in my room until morning, or I could try to find Mr. Holloway. Both choices carried risks I didn't fully understand. A soft click echoed down the corridor, the unmistakable sound of a door opening and closing. It came from the direction of the east wing. They were inviting me back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee the palace and never return. But an equally powerful urge pulled me toward the source of the sound. If I left now, I would never understand what was happening here, what had happened to those 13 men, what terrible decision they had made, and who or what the 14th member was. Professor Bennett. The voice floated from the darkness ahead, cultured and precise, the same voice I'd heard the previous night. Your presence is requested in the council chamber. My mouth went dry. Who are you? A messenger. The council is reconvening. And if I refuse? A pause. You are already involved. The pattern is set. Attendance is not optional. The temperature around me plummeted, my breath clouding before my face. The messenger's voice came again, now directly behind me. We have Mr. Holloway. If you wish to see him alive again, you will join us. I spun around. No one was there, but on the floor lay Mr. Holloway's pocket watch, the one he had checked so nervously before leaving the previous day. My hands shook as I picked it up. The watch had stopped at midnight. This isn't possible, I whispered to myself. This isn't real. But the cold metal of the watch in my palm felt undeniably real, as did the fear coursing through my veins. I made my decision. The journey back to the East Wing was a nightmare of shifting shadows and disembodied whispers. Twice I became disoriented, finding myself in rooms I hadn't entered, facing directions that made no geometric sense given the palace's layout. It was as if the building itself was rearranging around me, guiding or herding me toward my destination. The double doors to the East Wing stood open, spilling pale blue light into the corridor beyond. As I approached, the whispers intensified, forming a background murmur of urgent conversation. The gallery was transformed. Where earlier I had seen decay and abandonment, now the space gleamed with polish and care. The crimson curtains hung fresh and vibrant, gaslight sconces burned along the walls, and the air carried the scent of beeswax and tobacco. I had stepped back in time. At the far end, the doors to the ballroom were also open. Beyond them, I could make out movement, figures crossing back and forth in formal 19th century attire. The sound of a small orchestra drifted out, playing what I recognized as a Strauss waltz. I approached cautiously, every step an effort against the overwhelming urge to turn and flee. As I reached the ballroom entrance, the scene inside took my breath away. The vast space was illuminated by chandeliers blazing with hundreds of candles. Men in evening dress and women in elaborate gowns moved across the floor in perfect synchronicity. Servants circulated with trays of champagne. At first glance, it appeared to be a flawless recreation of a diplomatic ball from 1873. But something was wrong. The dancers' faces were blurred, as if photographed in motion. Their movements, though elegant, had a mechanical quality, like automated figures in an elaborate music box. And as I watched, I realized the same sequence of movements was repeating every few minutes, an endless loop of the same conversations, the same turns across the floor, the same sips of champagne. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice at my elbow. I turned to find a man in his 50s, immaculately dressed in period-appropriate evening wear. Unlike the dancers, his face was perfectly clear, handsome in a severe way, with a neatly trimmed beard and penetrating eyes that seemed too knowing, too ancient for his apparent age. "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. "August Wilhelm von Heimlich, Prussian ambassador and host of this little gathering." He bowed slightly. "And the 14th member of the Council of 13, though that was not a title I claimed publicly." My mind raced through the historical research I'd done. Von Heimlich had indeed been the Prussian ambassador to England in the 1870s, instrumental in organizing several diplomatic conferences. But he hadn't died at Ravencrest Palace. "You weren't among the dead," I said. A thin smile crossed his face. "Very good, Professor." "No, I survived the night. The only one who did." "What happened to them?" He gestured toward the council chamber door on the far side of the ballroom. "Perhaps it would be better to show you. They're waiting." Against my better judgment, I followed him across the ballroom floor. The dancers parted around us without ever acknowledging our presence, their blurred faces turned toward partners who never changed. "They're not real," I said. "Echoes," von Heimlich replied. "Moments preserved in time through the sheer force of what happened afterward." Like insect in amber. We reached the council chamber door. Von Heimlich paused, his hand on the ornate handle. "I should warn you, Professor. What you are about to witness has driven some to madness. The human mind is not designed to comprehend certain realities." "Where is Mr. Holloway?" I demanded. "Inside, with the others. Don't worry, no harm will come to him, provided our conditions are met." "What conditions?" Von Heimlich's expression darkened. "We require a new 14th member." Before I could respond, he pushed open the door. The council chamber beyond was lit by a circular arrangement of candles surrounding the table. 12 men sat in the high-backed chairs, their faces as clear as von Heimlich's. The 13th chair, directly opposite the door, was empty. And bound to it was Mr. Holloway, gagged and wide-eyed with terror. "Release him." I started forward, but von Heimlich's grip on my arm was like iron. "All in good time. First, you must hear our confession." The men around the table turned to face me. I recognized them from the portraits. The Council of 13 were 12 of them at least. Their expressions ranged from solemn to haunted. "Be seated," von Heimlich directed, indicating a 14th chair that I was certain hadn't been there during my earlier visit. "I prefer to stand." "As you wish." He took his own seat at the table. "Gentlemen, our witness has arrived." A Frenchman with a spectacular wax mustache spoke first. "We have waited many years for someone who might understand the burden we carry." "The weight of our decision," added an elderly Russian. "The consequences of our hubris," said an American in a southern drawl. Von Heimlich raised his hand, silencing them. "Allow me to explain, Professor. In 1873, these men, the most powerful diplomats in Europe and America, gathered secretly at Ravencrest to negotiate a treaty that would prevent a catastrophic war. The tensions between our nations had reached a breaking point. War seemed inevitable. "But you found a solution," I said, recalling the journal entry. "A bargain." "We did." Von Heimlich's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. I introduced them to an entity that offered alternative means of resolving our disputes. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of entity? The American spoke again, his voice hollow. It called itself a guardian of balance. It offered us a century of peace between our nations. At what price? I asked, already dreading the answer. Sacrifice, said the Russian. 13 lives every 13 years, chosen from across our nations. Horror bloomed in my chest. You agreed to human sacrifice? We thought ourselves so clever, von Heimlich continued. We negotiated the terms. The sacrifices would be criminals, men already condemned to death. No innocents would suffer, and millions would be spared the horrors of war. But the entity betrayed you, I guessed. No. Von Heimlich's expression was grim. We betrayed ourselves. When the time came for the first sacrifice, 12 of us couldn't go through with it. Only I remained committed to our pact. So what happened? The entity took them instead, the 12 who broke faith. Their deaths were reported as carbon monoxide poisoning. A tragic accident. My gaze moved to Mr. Holloway, still struggling against his bonds. And now? What do you want from me? The bargain persists, said von Heimlich. Every 13 years, I must provide 13 souls. For nearly a century and a half, I have fulfilled this obligation, selecting those whose deaths might pass unnoticed. That's monstrous. Is it? Consider the wars that did not happen, Professor. The millions who lived full lives because of our sacrifice. Until now, I said, suddenly understanding. Your bargain is ending. Von Heimlich nodded. The entity granted us a century of peace. That century ended in 1973. Since then, I have continued the sacrifices, but the power of the bargain wanes. Wars have returned. The balance shifts. What does this have to do with me? His eyes locked with mine. I grow weary. 150 years is a long time to bear such a burden alone. I seek a successor, someone to take my place as the 14th member. You're insane if you think I would agree to that. Consider the alternative. He gestured to Mr. Holloway. If you refuse, he becomes the first of this year's 13. And you will still bear witness, unable to leave until all 13 souls have been claimed. My mind raced. I needed to find a way out, to save Mr. Holloway and myself. Show me the entity, I said, playing for time. If I'm to consider your offer, I want to meet the guardian of balance directly. A murmur ran around the table. The Frenchman leaned forward. That would be most unwise. Nevertheless, it's my condition, I insisted. Von Heimlich studied me, then slowly nodded. Very well. The hour approaches midnight, the time when the veil between worlds is thinnest. We shall summon it. He rose and approached a section of the bookshelf that appeared no different from the rest. With practiced movements, he pressed a sequence of books, and a click sounded. A hidden door swung open, revealing a small antechamber beyond. The true council chamber, he said, where the real negotiations took place. The 12 other council members rose in unison and filed into the antechamber. Von Heimlich motioned for me to follow, then paused beside Mr. Holloway. Bring him, he ordered. The entity may require a demonstration of our commitment. 2 of the council members untied Mr. Holloway from the chair but kept his hands bound and his mouth gagged. They pushed him toward the antechamber, his eyes pleading with me as he passed. I followed, heart hammering in my chest. The antechamber was circular, like the main council room, but smaller and windowless. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols I had seen etched into the table. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what could only be blood. The council members arranged themselves in a circle around the altar. Von Heimlich positioned Mr. Holloway and me opposite him. "Midnight approaches," he announced. "The summoning begins." As if on cue, the 12 council members began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, something ancient and guttural that made my skin crawl. Von Heimlich removed an ornate dagger from inside his jacket, its blade gleaming wickedly in the candlelight. "The entity requires blood to manifest," he explained, drawing the blade across his palm. Blood welled and dripped onto the altar. The chanting intensified. The temperature in the room plummeted until I could see my breath. The candles flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. And then I felt it, a presence, vast and alien, pressing against the fabric of reality. The air in the center of the room began to warp and distort, like heat rising from asphalt, but darker, denser. A shape formed within the distortion, nothing human, nothing I could properly comprehend. My mind struggled to interpret what my eyes were seeing, settling on the impression of something with too many angles, too many dimensions. Von Heimlich addressed the entity in that same unknown language. It responded, not with sound, but with sensations that blossomed directly in my mind: hunger, patience, ancient amusement. "It greets you, Professor," Von Heimlich translated. "It says you have potential." The entity's attention turned to me, and I felt the weight of its scrutiny like physical pressure. Images flooded my consciousness, wars prevented, lives saved, balanced against the horror of the sacrifices. A grotesque calculus of suffering. "Ask it," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "Ask it what happens when the bargain truly ends." Von Heimlich hesitated, then spoke to the entity again. Its response came as a series of impressions: cataclysm, renewal, indifference. "It says the old order will fall," Von Heimlich interpreted. "A cleansing fire will spread across nations. From the ashes, a new world will emerge." "War," I said. "Global war. Unless the bargain is renewed," Von Heimlich added. "With a new 14th member." He extended the bloody dagger toward me. "Your decision, Professor. Join us and continue the work, or witness the beginning of the end." Mr. Holloway made muffled sounds of protest through his gag. The entity's presence intensified, pressing down on all of us like a physical weight. I stared at the dagger, then at the entity, then at the faces of the council members, men who had made a terrible choice and spent eternity regretting it. And finally, I looked at Mr. Holloway, whose eyes held not just fear, but something else. Recognition. Understanding. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I reached for the dagger. My fingers closed around the dagger's ornate hilt. Von Heimlich's eyes gleamed with triumph, while the council members watched in solemn anticipation. The entity's presence pulsed with what I could only interpret as satisfaction. But instead of slicing my palm as expected, I drove the blade into the stone altar with all my strength. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I reject your bargain." The reaction was instantaneous. The entity's formless mass contracted violently, and a shock wave of energy burst outward, knocking several council members to the ground. Von Heimlich's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You fool," he snarled. "Do you know what you've done?" "I've chosen not to perpetuate a cycle of murder," I replied, stepping back from the altar. Whatever comes next, it won't be built on sacrifice. The entity's presence expanded again, filling the chamber with a cold so intense it burned my lungs. Impressions bombarded my mind: fury, betrayal, hunger, while the walls themselves began to tremble. "It demands payment," von Heimlich shouted over the growing cacophony. "The bargain must be fulfilled." "Then fulfill yourself," I retorted, lunging toward Mr. Holloway. I grabbed his bound arms and pulled him toward the antechamber door, but von Heimlich moved with supernatural speed to block our path. "No one leaves," he declared. "Not until the entity is satisfied." The 12 council members rose as one, their expressions transformed from solemn regret to predatory hunger. They began to advance on us, moving with the same mechanical precision as the dancers in the ballroom. "They're not real," I realized aloud. "None of them are real except you." Von Heimlich's smile was cold. "Very good, Professor. My colleagues passed beyond long ago. What you see are merely extensions of the entity's will and mine." I backed away, pulling Mr. Holloway with me. "And what are you? You should have died a century ago." "I am the keeper of the bargain. The entity granted me certain accommodations in exchange for my service." My back hit the altar. We were surrounded, with no clear path of escape. The dagger still protruded from the stone, vibrating with the chamber's increasing tremors. In desperation, I yanked the dagger free and held it before me. "Stay back." Von Heimlich laughed. "You cannot harm what is already dead, Professor." The phantom council members closed in. Mr. Holloway struggled against his bonds, his eyes wild with terror. I felt for the knots binding his wrists, working blindly to loosen them while keeping the dagger pointed toward our attackers. "There is still a way out," von Heimlich offered. "Become the 14th member. Take my place. I will finally rest, and you will continue the work." "And condemn 13 innocent people every 13 years? Never." His expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." He gestured, and 2 of the phantoms lunged forward to seize Mr. Holloway. I slashed at them with the dagger, but the blade passed through their forms without resistance. They pulled Mr. Holloway toward the altar, forcing him down upon its stained surface. "The first sacrifice," von Heimlich intoned, retrieving a second dagger from within his jacket. "No!" I charged him, dagger aimed at his heart. This time, the blade met resistance. Von Heimlich gasped as the ornate dagger sank into his chest. He looked down at it in shock, then back at me, his expression one of profound surprise. "Impossible," he whispered. But the evidence was before us both, dark blood, almost black in the candlelight, spreading across his immaculate waistcoat. His phantom council members flickered like faulty projections. The entity's presence contracted again, withdrawing partially from our reality. "Ow!" von Heimlich demanded, staggering backward. The answer came to me in a flash of insight. The altar. When I stabbed it, I broke the pattern. I changed the rules of your bargain. He fell to his knees, clutching the protruding dagger. 150 years, he murmured. 150 years of service, and this is my reward? The phantom council members were dissolving now, their forms dissipating like smoke in a breeze. Only von Heimlich remained solid, though even he seemed to be losing substance around the edges. I rushed to Mr. Holloway, whose bonds had loosened enough for him to free one hand. Together we removed his gag and finished untying him. "We need to get out of here," he gasped. "Now, before it recovers." The entity's presence was indeed regathering, concentrating around von Heimlich's kneeling form. Tendrils of that impossible non-matter wrapped around him, seeping into the wound in his chest. Too late, von Heimlich said, his voice distorting as the entity flowed into him. The bargain finds a way. His body began to change, expanding and contracting in nauseating ways as the entity possessed him fully. His face stretched and compressed, eyes multiplying and shifting position across features that no longer resembled anything human. Mr. Holloway pulled me toward the door. "Run." We burst through into the main council chamber, which was now shaking violently. Books tumbled from shelves, and cracks appeared in the domed ceiling. Behind us, what had once been von Heimlich emerged from the antechamber, a grotesque fusion of man and entity, still wearing scraps of his elegant evening clothes. "The bargain must be fulfilled," it said in a voice that hurt my ears. 13 souls every 13 years. "This way," Mr. Holloway shouted, dragging me toward the ballroom door. The entities that had been ballroom dancers were disintegrating as we passed through, their endless waltz finally interrupted. The palace around us was coming apart, the veneer of 19th century splendor giving way to the dilapidated reality beneath. We ran through the gallery, which seemed to stretch endlessly before us. Behind, the amalgamation of von Heimlich and the entity pursued, moving with a jerky, impossible gait that somehow gained on us despite our desperate sprint. "The doors," I gasped as we approached the exit to the east wing. But they were locked, or worse, no longer there at all. Where the double doors had stood, now there was only a solid wall. "This can't be happening," I panted, pressing my hands against the barrier. "It's trying to trap us," Mr. Holloway said, looking around frantically. "The palace responds to its will." The entity von Heimlich hybrid had nearly reached us. It extended a limb that was sometimes an arm, sometimes something else entirely. "Join us, Professor," it gurgled. "Become the 14th member." "There." Mr. Holloway pointed to a narrow servant's door half hidden in an alcove. "Another way out." We dove through the door into a cramped service corridor. Mr. Holloway slammed it shut behind us and shoved a metal serving cart against it. "That won't hold for long," he warned. The corridor led to a spiral staircase descending into darkness. We had no choice but to follow it down, using my phone's flashlight to guide our way. The walls pressed close on either side, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. "Where does this lead?" I asked between labored breaths. "The kitchens, if we're lucky," Mr. Holloway replied. "If not..." He didn't need to finish. We both knew what waited if we made a wrong turn. Above us, a crash signaled that the entity had broken through the service door. Inhuman sounds echoed down the stairwell, a nightmarish blend of gurgling, scraping, and what might have been laughter. We reached the bottom of the stairs and found ourselves in a cavernous kitchen, its 19th century fixtures long abandoned. Moonlight filtered through grimy windows, revealing multiple doors leading out. "Which way?" I gasped. Mr. Holloway hesitated, then pointed to a heavy door on the far wall. "The delivery entrance. It leads directly outside." We raced across the kitchen, dodging around islands and prep tables. Behind us, the entity's distorted form appeared at the base of the stairs, larger now, filling the doorway completely. "The bargain must be fulfilled," it repeated, its voice resonating from multiple orifices that opened and closed across its mass. We reached the door, but it was secured with a heavy iron padlock. "No," I moaned, rattling the unyielding chain. Mr. Holloway pushed me aside and pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. "Stand back." His hands shook as he sorted through the keys. Behind us, the entity oozed forward, dissolving into a more fluid state to slip between the kitchen fixtures. "Hurry," I urged. "I'm trying." He found a key and jammed it into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried another and another. The entity was halfway across the kitchen now, reforming into a more substantial shape with each yard it gained. Its mass rippled with faces, von Heimlich, the council members, and others I didn't recognize, mouths open in silent screams. Mr. Holloway tried a fourth key. The lock clicked and fell open. "Go," he shouted, shoving the door wide. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of freedom. We stumbled outside onto a stone loading dock, then down a short flight of stairs to the gravel drive. The palace loomed behind us, its windows blazing with an unnatural blue light. The entire structure seemed to be pulsing, expanding and contracting like a monstrous heart. "Don't look back," Mr. Holloway panted as we ran toward the tree line. "Whatever happens, don't look back." But I couldn't help myself. As we reached the edge of the woods, I turned for one last glimpse of Ravencrest Palace. What I saw defied description. The building was transforming, its architectural features twisting into organic shapes that reminded me sickeningly of human anatomy. At its center, where the east wing should have been, a vast mouth-like aperture was opening, revealing a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow the moonlight. And emerging from that darkness were figures, dozens of them, moving with the same mechanical precision as the Phantom Council members. The past victims of von Heimlich's bargain, I realized, summoned by the entity's desperation. "Professor." Mr. Holloway's voice snapped me back to our immediate danger. "We need to keep moving." We plunged into the woods, following a narrow path that wound between ancient trees. The undergrowth tore at our clothes and skin, branches whipping our faces as we ran. Behind us, the sound of pursuit grew, not just one entity now, but many, crashing through the forest with inhuman determination. "How far to the road?" I gasped. 2 miles, Mr. Holloway replied grimly. "If we can make it to my car." A figure stepped onto the path ahead, blocking our way, one of the phantom victims, a woman in modern dress with a gaping wound across her throat. Her eyes were empty voids. We skidded to a halt. More phantoms appeared from between the trees, encircling us. Unlike the council members in the palace, these spirits showed the manner of their deaths clearly: stab wounds, strangulation marks, broken necks. "Von Heimlich's sacrifices," Mr. Holloway whispered. "All of them." They closed in, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if they were puppets controlled by an inexperienced hand. Behind them came the entity von Heimlich hybrid, its form now so distorted it barely retained any human characteristics. "The bargain finds a way," it repeated, its voice a chorus of all its victims. We stood back to back, turning slowly to keep the advancing phantoms in view. There seemed to be no escape, no path through their tightening circle. In that moment of desperation, clarity struck me like lightning. The pattern. The rules. The number 13. "Mr. Holloway," I said urgently, "how many victims are there?" He looked around, counting quickly. "I don't know." "Dozens. Yet von Heimlich took 13 every 13 years since 1873. "But it's incomplete," I interrupted. "The cycle. This year's 13 haven't been taken yet." Understanding dawned on his face. "The bargain is unfulfilled." "Exactly." I faced the entity directly. "You can't take us. The pattern is broken. and you have no claim until the cycle begins anew. The entity paused, its mass rippling with what might have been uncertainty. The phantoms hesitated in their advance. The 14th member must choose the 13, it finally said. Von Heimlich was the 14th member, and he's gone, I countered. I refused the position. There is no 14th member to make the choice. A howl of rage and frustration tore through the forest, emanating from the entity and echoed by every phantom. Trees swayed as if in a violent storm, though the air around us remained unnaturally still. Then all will suffer, the entity roared. The bargain broken means the end of all. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble. In the distance, I could see Ravencrest Palace contorting further, its structure now barely recognizable as a building. A column of that same impossible darkness rose from its center, stretching toward the night sky. What's happening? I shouted over the growing tumult. The entity is manifesting fully, Mr. Holloway replied, his face ashen. Without the bargain to contain it, it's breaking through into our world completely. The phantoms around us were changing too, their forms becoming more solid, more real. They advanced again, no longer hesitant. Run. Mr. Holloway grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a narrow gap in their circle. We burst through, the phantom's cold fingers brushing against us as we passed. One caught my jacket, tearing it before I could pull free. We sprinted deeper into the woods, away from the path now, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. Behind us, the forest filled with unnatural light as the entity's manifestation grew stronger. The phantoms gave chase, moving faster now, more coordinated. Above it all, the entity's rage echoed like thunder. There, Mr. Holloway pointed ahead, where moonlight revealed the gleam of metal, his car, parked on a narrow forest track I hadn't noticed before. We made a final desperate sprint for the vehicle. Mr. Holloway fumbled with his keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the driver's door. He dove in and reached across to unlock my side. I grasped the handle, but before I could open it, cold hands seized me from behind. I was yanked backward, away from the car, away from escape. Professor, Mr. Holloway shouted, lunging across the seat toward me. But I was already being dragged back toward the phantoms, toward the entity that waited beyond. My fingers clawed at the ground, seeking purchase against the inexorable pull. I looked up one last time at Mr. Holloway, his face a mask of horror through the car window. Doe! I screamed. Tell what happened here. The truth must be known. The last thing I saw was his agonized expression as the car engine roared to life. Then the phantoms pulled me into their midst, and darkness closed around me like a fist. Consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from the depths of a dark lake. I found myself lying on a cold stone floor, my body aching in ways I couldn't immediately catalog. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the council chamber of Ravencrest Palace. But it had changed. The neat circle of 13 chairs had been replaced by a chaotic arrangement that defied Euclidean geometry. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with slow, deliberate movements. The domed ceiling had transformed into something resembling an inverted whirlpool, its center a vortex of that same impossible darkness. I sat up carefully, every muscle protesting. My clothes were torn and dirty, but I appeared to be physically unharmed. Around the chamber, the phantoms stood in silent observation, their forms more solid than before, yet still not quite real. They made no move to approach me, content for now to simply watch. You've returned to us, Professor Bennett. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, no longer just von Heimlich's cultured tones, but a blend of countless others. How fitting that our discussion should continue where it began. The entity manifested in the center of the room, not in any form I could properly describe, but as a shimmering distortion of reality that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Within its shifting mass, I caught glimpses of faces, including von Heimlich's, appearing and disappearing like bubbles rising through thick liquid. "There's nothing to discuss," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've made my position clear. I will not become your 14th member. I will not choose 13 sacrifices. Yet here you are," the entity observed, "delivered to us by our servants. One does not need to accept a role to fulfill it." I got to my feet, fighting waves of dizziness. Mr. Holloway escaped. He'll tell others what happened here. Who would believe such a tale? The entity's amusement was palpable. A ghost story about a haunted palace and an ancient pact. He will be dismissed as a madman if he speaks at all. It was right, I realized with a sinking heart. Even with my academic credentials, I would have struggled to convince anyone of what I'd experienced. Mr. Holloway, a caretaker with no evidence beyond his word, stood no chance. "What do you want from me?" I asked, playing for time as I surveyed the chamber, looking for any possible escape route. "What we have always wanted." The entity's form contracted slightly, becoming more focused. "A witness, a keeper, a partner in the great work of balance. Balance maintained through murder. Balance maintained through sacrifice," it corrected. "A distinction that has meaning. Those chosen give their lives so millions may live in peace." "That's a lie," I countered. "Your bargain didn't prevent war. It just delayed it. And when it came, it was worse than it might have been." The entity pulsed with what might have been contemplation. "Perhaps. Time is fluid from our perspective. Outcomes merge and diverge. But the pattern has value beyond human concerns of war and peace." "What pattern? What are you really trying to accomplish?" Instead of answering directly, the entity expanded, filling more of the chamber. Images flashed within its mass, scenes of history spanning centuries, some familiar from textbooks, others entirely unknown to me. Wars and peace treaties, assassinations and coronations, revolutions and renaissance. "We are weavers of fate," it said at last. "The deaths we claim are threads pulled to shape the tapestry of human destiny. For what purpose? Purpose implies an end. We work in cycles without end, maintaining the grand design." A thought occurred to me. "You're trapped in a pattern of your own, aren't you? 13 sacrifices every 13 years. The 14th member acting as your anchor to this world." The entity's form rippled violently, suggesting I'd struck a nerve. "We are bound by agreements older than your civilization. The pattern sustains us as it sustains you. And if the pattern breaks?" "Chaos," it replied simply. "The unraveling of order. The 13th hour strikes, and all certainty ends." As if on cue, the grandfather clock in the corridor began to chime. The phantoms stirred, moving closer. The entity's form pulsed with each sonorous toll. 1, 2, 3. What happens when it reaches 13? I asked, backing away from the advancing phantoms. 4, 5, 6. The cycle resolves, the entity answered. Either with 13 new sacrifices chosen, or with the unmaking of all that is. 7, 8, 9. The chamber was changing more rapidly now, its features dissolving into that same organic nightmare I'd glimpsed outside. The walls ran like melting wax, revealing glimpses of other places, other times, other realities. 10, 11, 12. Your final opportunity, Professor Bennett, the entity said, its voice now a cacophony of thousands. Become the 14th member. Choose the 13. Maintain the pattern. I looked around at the phantoms, von Heimlich's victims across a century and a half. Their eyes held no malice, only a terrible resignation. They had been sacrificed to maintain a pattern they never consented to, never understood. No, I said, for the last time. The pattern ends with me. 13. The final toll reverberated through the chamber, through the palace, through reality itself. The entity's form expanded explosively, engulfing everything in sight. The phantoms wailed in chorus, not in anger but in release. The boundaries between worlds thinned to nothing, and I found myself falling through layers of existence, witnessing countless realities simultaneously. I saw Ravencrest Palace as it had been, as it was, as it might have been, as it never was. I saw the Council of 13 meeting across infinite variations, making different choices, suffering different fates. I saw von Heimlich as a young diplomat, as an ageless monster, as a withered corpse, as a being of pure energy. And I saw myself, refusing the entity in some realities, accepting in others, dying in most, surviving in few. The kaleidoscope of possibilities overwhelmed my senses. I was everywhere and nowhere, everywhen and nowhen. My consciousness stretched to breaking point, unable to contain the vastness of what I was experiencing. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. Silence fell, absolute and profound. I opened eyes I hadn't realized I'd closed and found myself lying on the ground outside Ravencrest Palace. Dawn was breaking, pale light illuminating the scene before me. The palace was gone. Where the imposing structure had stood for centuries, there was now only a perfectly circular depression in the earth, as if the building and its foundations had been surgically removed from reality. The gardens, the gravel drive, all remained intact, stopping precisely at the edge of that impossible absence. I sat up slowly, checking myself for injuries. My clothes were clean and undamaged, showing no sign of my ordeal in the forest or the chamber. Had it all been a hallucination? A vivid nightmare brought on by exhaustion and Mr. Holloway's ghost stories? Professor Bennett. The voice came from behind me. I turned to see Mr. Holloway hurrying across the lawn, his face a mask of concern. "Thank God you're all right," he said, helping me to my feet. "I've been searching for you all night." I stared at him in confusion. "You escaped. In your car. The phantoms took me." He frowned. "What phantoms?" "I left you settling in your room last evening. When I returned this morning and found your bed hadn't been slept in, I feared the worst. But the palace," I gestured toward the circular void. "It's gone." Mr. Holloway looked at me strangely. "Professor, there has never been a palace here. Ravencrest Manor was a modest country house that burned down in 1874. That's why your assessment grant was unusual. There's been nothing to assess for over a century." I felt dizzy, unmoored from reality. The Council of 13? "A local legend," he said, his expression softening with concern. 13 diplomats supposedly met here and died in the fire. Conspiracy theorists claim it was no accident, but no historical record confirms such a meeting ever took place. He guided me gently toward a small cottage visible at the edge of the property. "Come, you need rest. Whatever happened to you last night, you're safe now." I allowed him to lead me, my mind reeling. Had it all been a delusion? A waking dream constructed from fragments of local folklore and my own research? As we approached the cottage, something fell from my pocket onto the gravel path. I stooped to pick it up, a pocket watch, antique and ornate, its hands frozen at 13 o'clock. 13 o'clock. An impossible hour. Mr. Holloway saw it too, his expression flickering momentarily from concern to something else, recognition, perhaps fear. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I met his eyes, searching for any hint of shared memory, any acknowledgement of what we had experienced together. His face remained impassive, professionally concerned. "I found it," I replied, pocketing the watch. "Near where the palace used to be." He nodded slowly. "There are still artifacts that turn up from time to time. The fire didn't consume everything." We reached the cottage, and he opened the door for me. Inside was a simple living room with a fireplace, bookshelves, and comfortable furniture. On the mantelpiece stood a row of photographs in silver frames. My blood froze. The center photograph showed 13 men standing on the steps of Ravencrest Palace, the Council of 13. And standing slightly apart from them, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was Mr. Holloway, unchanged from how he appeared before me now. "You were there," I whispered. He closed the door behind us, his expression transforming completely. Gone was the concerned caretaker, replaced by something ancient and knowing. "I have always been here," he said simply. "Long before von Heimlich, before the council, before the entity found its way to this place." "What are you?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "A guardian of a different sort. A counterbalance to the entity's influence. You used me, I realized. You brought me here to break the pattern. I presented an opportunity," he corrected. "You chose to act upon it. The responsibility for what follows is shared between us." I backed away from him. "And what does follow?" The entity spoke of chaos, of unmaking. The entity spoke of what it feared. Mr. Holloway moved to the fireplace, gazing at the photograph. "The end of its pattern means the end of its power, not the end of all things." "Then it's over? The sacrifices, the bargain?" He turned back to me, his eyes reflecting light in a way that wasn't quite human. "That particular pattern is broken, yes. But others exist, and new ones form constantly. The weaving never ceases, Professor. Only the weavers change." My hand closed around the pocket watch in my pocket. 13 o'clock. The 13th hour. The hour that existed outside normal time, outside normal reality. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now?" Mr. Holloway, or whatever he truly was, gestured to the chair by the fireplace. "Now we talk about your new position. The entity is vanquished, but the void it leaves must be filled." "I want no part of this," I said firmly. "I broke the pattern to end it, not to replace it. And yet you carry the token of transition." He nodded toward my pocket where the watch rested. "Some choices are made for us by our actions, Professor Bennett. You destroyed the 14th member. By the oldest laws, you inherit his mantle, though not his methods." I took up a watch, staring at its impossible 13th hour. "And if I refuse?" "You already tried that approach," he reminded me. "Here we are nonetheless." Outside the cottage window, I could see the circular void where Ravencrest Palace had stood. But as I watched, something was happening. Grass was growing, spreading across the barren earth. Trees were sprouting, reaching skyward with supernatural speed. Nature was reclaiming the space, erasing the last physical evidence of the entity's presence. "The world heals," Mr. Holloway observed. "It always does, given the chance. Your role now is to ensure it has that chance." "By doing what, exactly?" "By maintaining a different kind of balance. Not through sacrifice, but through witness. Through memory." He approached me, his movements somehow both human and not. "The entity fed on death. What replaces it must be nourished differently." I looked down at the watch again. Its hands had moved, no longer fixed at 13 but ticking forward normally. The moment of transition had passed. "I don't understand what you're asking of me," I said. "Understanding comes with time, and you now have plenty of that." He gestured to the chair again. "Sit, Professor Bennett. We have much to discuss before the sun sets." Reluctantly, I took the seat. The fireplace ignited spontaneously, though no one had touched it. In the dancing flames, I saw echoes of Ravencrest Palace, of the Council of 13, of von Heimlich and his victims. Memories preserved not in blood, but in light and warmth. Mr. Holloway, guardian, counterbalance, whatever he was, took the chair opposite mine. His form seemed to flicker occasionally, revealing something older, vaster. "Every ending is a beginning," he said, his voice resonating with power I hadn't detected before. "The 13th hour strikes but once. What follows is up to those who survive it." Outside, darkness was falling, but it was an ordinary darkness, free from the unnatural shadows that had haunted Ravencrest. Stars appeared one by one in the clear sky, their ancient light reaching us across impossible distances. I thought of all the people who would never know how close their world had come to unraveling, who would never understand the pattern that had shaped their history from the shadows. I thought of von Heimlich, trapped for over a century in his bargain with the entity. I thought of the phantom victims, now hopefully released from their endless service. And I thought of myself, historian, witness, and now something more. The pocket watch ticked steadily in my hand, counting off seconds of a life that had fundamentally changed. Whatever role I had inherited, whatever responsibility now rested on my shoulders, one thing was certain: the echoes of Ravencrest Palace would never truly fade. They would live on in memory, in whispered legends, in the subtle patterns of reality itself. As night deepened around the cottage, Mr. Holloway began to speak, telling me stories of patterns broken and remade throughout history. I listened, absorbing knowledge that no living human had possessed before, preparing for a future I could not yet imagine. The 13th hour had passed, but its consequences would echo through all the hours to follow. In ending one pattern, I had become part of another, perhaps the oldest pattern of all. The pattern of survival. The pattern of renewal. The pattern of bearing witness to the darkness and emerging, changed but intact, into the light of a new day. I closed my hand around the pocket watch and surrendered to my fate. What if the dead don't leave? What if they linger, watching, waiting for you to notice them? The train journey to Essex had been longer than I expected, and as the taxi wound its way through the narrow country lanes, I couldn't help but feel that with each passing mile, I was traveling deeper into the past. Westfield Manor loomed ahead, its Victorian facade softened by the golden glow of the setting sun. As a historical preservation specialist, I should have been thrilled at the opportunity to document and catalog the artifacts of such an untouched estate. Instead, an inexplicable unease crept over me as the taxi's tires crunched on the gravel driveway. "That's Westfield Manor, sir," the driver announced, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Been empty for nigh on 30 years, they say. Not entirely empty, I corrected him, retrieving my luggage. The Harrison Foundation has maintained a skeleton staff. I paid the fare and added, I'll be staying for a month to complete my work. The drivers with their face creased with concern. Month's a long time to be alone in a place like this, especially with November coming on. The nights get long and dark out here. I dismissed his warning with a practiced smile. I've worked in far more isolated places, Mr. Thornton. Edwin Thornton. My family's been in these parts for generations. He hesitated, then added, they say the last owner, Lord William Westfield, never left, if you catch my meaning. Those stories. Every old house had them. Thank you for the warning, Mr. Thornton. As the taxi retreated down the drive, I turned to face the manor. 3 stories of weathered stone and leaded glass windows stared back at me like a face holding secrets behind its eyes. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of decay, fallen leaves, damp earth, and something else, something sweeter, like old perfume. The caretaker, Mrs. Reynolds, greeted me at the door. A thin, severe woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, she offered no smile as she led me through the entrance hall. Your rooms are prepared in the East Wing, Dr. Mitchell. The study has been set up for your work as requested. Her voice echoed in the vast space. Dinner will be at 7. I retired to the cottage at 8. After that, you'll be on your own. Thank you, that won't be a problem. I tried to sound confident, though the vastness of the entrance hall, with its somber portraits and heavy oak paneling, seemed to absorb my words. As we climbed the grand staircase, I felt a distinct sensation of being watched. I glanced back, expecting to see a servant or perhaps another researcher, but there was only the empty hall, shadows deepening in the corners as the afternoon light faded. Is there anyone else staying at the manor? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Mrs. Reynolds paused on the landing. Just you, Dr. Mitchell. The gardener comes Tuesdays and Fridays, but he doesn't enter the house. She continued up the stairs, but I lingered a moment. There, a whisper of movement at the edge of my vision, like the flutter of a skirt disappearing around a corner. When I turned to look directly, nothing was there. My rooms were spacious but oppressive, furnished with heavy Victorian pieces that seemed to crowd the space. A 4-poster bed dominated the bedroom, while the adjoining study contained a massive mahogany desk positioned before a window overlooking the overgrown gardens. This will be perfect, I told Mrs. Reynolds. I'll unpack and then perhaps explore a little before dinner. The west wing is locked, she stated flatly. Lord Westfield's orders, before he passed. Those rooms haven't been opened in decades. I wanted to point out that Lord Westfield had been dead for nearly 30 years and could hardly enforce his wishes, but something in her stern expression stopped me. Of course. I'll confine my work to the accessible areas. After she left, I began unpacking my equipment, laptop, digital camera, portable scanner, and notebooks. As I worked, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. I glanced at the window, thinking it might be open, but it was firmly shut. The cold spot moved, drifting across the room like an invisible presence. I shivered, telling myself it was merely an old house with poor insulation and uneven heating. Yet as I arranged my books on the desk, a photograph I placed at the edge slid to the floor. When I bent to retrieve it, I noticed a faint scent, lilacs and something else, perhaps vanilla. It was gone almost instantly, but it left me with a strange hollow feeling in my chest. The manor creaked and settled around me as the day faded. Normal sounds for an old building, I reasoned, but each one made me tense. A soft tapping started somewhere in the walls, perhaps water pipes or the branch of a tree against the window, but it sounded unnervingly like fingernails drumming impatiently. I decided to distract myself by exploring the first floor. The long gallery was lined with portraits, generations of Westfield staring down with the same proud tilt to their chins, the same steel in their eyes. All except one, a young woman in a blue dress, her expression soft and sad. Unlike the others, her portrait was smaller, positioned in the shadows as though it wasn't meant to command attention. The brass plate beneath it read Elizabeth Thornton, 1893 to 1922. Thornton. The same surname as my taxi driver. I leaned closer, studying her features, dark hair arranged in the fashion of the early 20s, large eyes that seemed to look beyond the viewer, full lips curved in a smile that didn't reach those eyes. She was Lord William's fiancée. Mrs. Reynolds' voice made me jump. I hadn't heard her approach. She died before they could marry. Drowned in the lake on the property. They say it was an accident, but... She trailed off, her expression guarded. But what? I prompted. Nothing but local gossip, Dr. Mitchell. Dinner is served. Throughout the silent meal, I felt the weight of the house around me, as though it were listening, waiting. When Mrs. Reynolds left for her cottage, the solitude settled over me like a shroud. I retreated to my study to organize my notes for the next day's work. The old clock in the hallway struck 11, its chimes reverberating through the empty corridors. As the sound faded, I heard something else, a soft melody drifting up from somewhere below. Piano notes, hesitant at first, then flowing into a melancholy tune I didn't recognize. My rational mind offered explanations, a radio left on by Mrs. Reynolds, perhaps an electronic device on a timer. But as I listened, the playing became more confident, more emotional, with the unmistakable imperfections of a live performance, a hesitation here, a slightly rushed passage there. I rose from my desk, drawn to the door. The logical course would be to stay put, to tell myself there was a reasonable explanation. Instead, I found myself stepping into the darkened hallway, following the haunting melody down the grand staircase. The music led me to a door I hadn't noticed earlier, tucked beneath the staircase. It was unlocked. Beyond it, a narrow service corridor stretched into darkness, the piano notes clearer now, pulling me forward like an invisible thread. At the end of the corridor, light spilled from beneath another door, a warm, flickering light, like candles. The music stopped abruptly as my hand touched the doorknob. The sudden silence was more terrifying than any sound could have been. I hesitated, heart pounding in my throat. Then, from the other side of the door came a sound that chilled my blood, a woman's soft laughter, followed by a whisper that seemed to pass directly through the wood. "William, is that you? Have you finally come back to me?" I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. The corridor was suddenly frigid, my breath fogging in the air. The door remained closed, but the whisper had been clear, as though lips had been inches from my ear. "Hello?" I called, my voice embarrassingly weak. "Is someone there?" No answer came, but the candle-like light beneath the door extinguished, plunging the corridor into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, activating its flashlight with trembling fingers. The beam revealed nothing but peeling wallpaper and dusty floorboards. No footprints but my own disturbed the thick layer of dust. I forced myself to approach the door again, to turn the knob and push it open. The hinges groaned in protest, revealing a small music room. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating a grand piano in the center, its lid closed, a fine layer of dust undisturbed across its polished surface. No one had played this instrument in years. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in the massive four-poster bed, listening to the house. The tapping in the walls had resumed, more insistent now, almost like a code. The temperature fluctuated. One moment I was pulling the heavy blankets up to my chin, the next I was throwing them off, my skin clammy with sweat. Shortly before dawn, exhaustion finally claimed me. I dreamed of a woman in a blue dress, her back to me as she stood at the edge of a dark lake. When she turned, water streamed from her hair, her clothes, her eyes. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, more water poured forth, an endless torrent that rose around us both. I woke gasping, convinced for a terrifying moment that I was drowning. Morning light dispelled some of the previous night's dread. I showered, dressed, and went downstairs to find Mrs. Reynolds preparing breakfast in the kitchen. "Did you sleep well, Dr. Mitchell?" she asked, setting a plate of eggs and toast before me. "Not particularly," I admitted. "I heard music last night." "Piano music." Her hand paused as she poured coffee. "Did you explore the West Wing after I left?" "No, of course not. It came from a small music room off the service corridor beneath the stairs." Mrs. Reynolds' expression remained neutral, but I noticed how her fingers tightened around the coffee pot. "That room has been locked for years." "It wasn't locked last night," I said. "I went inside. There was no one there, but I'm certain I heard someone playing." She set the coffee pot down with deliberate care. "The manor plays tricks, Dr. Mitchell. Old pipes, settling foundations, the wind through ill-fitted windows, they create all manner of strange sounds." "This wasn't some random noise," I insisted. "It was a melody, played with skill and emotion. And I stopped myself, suddenly reluctant to mention the whisper, the woman's voice asking for William." "Heard what?" Mrs. Reynolds pressed. I shook my head. "Nothing. Just the music." She studied me for a long moment. "Perhaps you should confine your work to daylight hours, Dr. Mitchell. The manor, it changes after dark." The morning passed quickly as I cataloged the library's collection of first editions. The work was absorbing enough to push the previous night's experience to the back of my mind. By noon, I was ready to begin documenting the art collection in the East Wing. As I photographed each painting, making notes on condition and provenance, I found my attention repeatedly drawn to the windows overlooking the grounds. Beyond the formal gardens lay a small lake, its surface dark and still despite the breeze that stirred the surrounding trees. The drowning sight. Something about it called to me, an insistent pull I couldn't ignore. After lunch, I decided to explore the grounds. The November air was crisp, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. The gardens had long since surrendered to neglect. Marble statues were half consumed by ivy, paths cracked and heaved by roots, fountains dry and choked with leaves. The lake lay beyond, nestled in a hollow surrounded by ancient oaks. As I approached, the wind died completely. No bird sang. Even my footsteps seemed muted as I reached the shore. The water was unnaturally still, reflecting the trees and sky like a perfect mirror. At the far end stood a small boathouse, its wooden structure weathered to a silvery gray. Something compelled me toward it, though every rational instinct warned against it. The boathouse door hung askew on rusted hinges. Inside, an old rowboat rested on the damp boards, its paint peeling, a length of rope coiled in its bottom. But it was the wall that captured my attention, specifically what was carved into the weathered planks. Names. Dozens of them, etched with various implements. Most were faded, barely legible, accompanied by dates spanning decades. Lovers, perhaps, marking their trysts. One pair of names stood out, carved more deeply than the others: William and Elizabeth, forever, 1922. Below this, in different handwriting, jagged and desperate, he lied. I traced the letters with my fingertips, feeling a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the November air. As my fingers touched the word lied, something shifted in the boat, the coiled rope unspooling slightly, but there was no breeze to move it. I backed away, an irrational fear gripping me. As I turned to leave, my foot struck something half buried in the dirt floor. I crouched to examine it, a tarnished silver locket on a broken chain. When I picked it up, it fell open in my palm. Inside was a miniature photograph of a man I recognized from the portraits in the manor, William Westfield in his youth, handsome and severe. The other side held a tiny braid of dark hair tied with blue thread. I should have left it there. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket, feeling its weight like a stone. The walk back to the manor seemed longer, the sun already sinking toward the horizon. I glanced back once at the lake and froze. A figure stood by the water's edge, a woman in a blue dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She was looking directly at me. I blinked, and she was gone. Mrs. Reynolds was nowhere to be seen when I returned to the house. A note on the kitchen table informed me that dinner was prepared and waiting in the warming oven, and that she had been called away to attend to her sister, who had fallen ill. She would return the following evening. I would be completely alone in Westfield Manor for the night. The realization should have unsettled me after the previous night's experiences, but instead, I felt a strange anticipation. If there was something, someone, in this house, I would have the opportunity to investigate without interference. After dinner, I retreated to my study with the silver locket. Under the bright desk lamp, I examined it more closely. The initials E.T. were engraved on the back, Elizabeth Thornton. The locket's chain wasn't broken by age or accident, it had been forcibly snapped. As night fully descended, the manor's sounds intensified, creaking floorboards, rattling windows, the persistent tapping in the walls. I tried to focus on my work, but found myself straining to hear the piano music again. At precisely 11 o'clock, as the grandfather clock's chimes echoed through the house, a different sound reached me: water. The distinct splashing of someone moving through water, followed by dripping. It seemed to come from the hallway outside my room. Heart racing, I approached the door, locket clutched in my hand. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" In response, a puddle of water began seeping beneath my door, spreading across the floor with impossible speed. The temperature plummeted, my breath clouding before me. I backed away as the puddle continued to expand, forming a rough path across the floor. The water was not flowing randomly, it was creating a shape, a figure. As I watched, frozen in horror and fascination, the water rose, contorting itself into the translucent outline of a woman. For a moment, the watery figure simply stood there, dripping and rippling, features indistinct but recognizably female in form. Then it extended an arm toward me, droplets falling from elongated fingers. I should have screamed, should have run. Instead, I took a step forward, the locket now burning cold against my palm. "Elizabeth?" I whispered. The figure's head tilted, as though in acknowledgement or curiosity. It drifted closer, leaving a trail of moisture on the floorboards. As it approached, the watery form began to solidify, features becoming more distinct, dark hollows for eyes, the suggestion of flowing hair, the rippling outline of a dress. When it was mere feet away, the figure pointed at my hand, at the locket I held. "I found this," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. At the boathouse. It's yours, isn't it? The temperature dropped further. Ice crystals formed at the edges of the puddles on the floor, spreading in delicate patterns. The watery figure nodded almost imperceptibly. I held out the locket. Here. Take it. The figure made no move to accept it. Instead, it pointed again, then gestured toward the door. You want me to follow you? Another nod, more distinct this time. The figure retreated, passing impossibly through the closed door. Water continued to seep beneath it, forming a trail in the hallway beyond. Every instinct screamed that following would be madness. Yet I found myself opening the door, stepping into the darkened corridor, following the glistening path of water. It led downstairs, through the grand entrance hall, toward the locked west wing. As I approached the sealed door, I expected it to be an obstacle. Instead, it swung open at my touch, the water trail continuing beyond. The west wing was colder, the air stale and undisturbed. My flashlight revealed furniture draped in sheets, wall hangings covered in dust cloths, floorboards warped from decades of neglect. The water led me deeper, to a door at the end of the corridor. Unlike the others, this one was well maintained, the brass doorknob polished to a shine. A man's room, judging by the heavy, masculine furniture visible as the door creaked open. Lord William's private chamber. The watery figure stood in the center of the room, more solid now, more human. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see her face, Elizabeth Thornton, just as she appeared in her portrait, but with a terrible sadness in her eyes. She pointed to the massive desk by the window. What am I looking for? I asked, approaching cautiously. She made a motion like opening a drawer. The desk was locked, but the key was in the adjacent bookshelf, hidden inside a hollow book, the picture of Dorian Gray. My hands trembled as I unlocked the desk, pulling open the drawer. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. As I lifted it, a pressed flower fell out, a sprig of dried lilac, the same scent I detected in my room. The watery figure of Elizabeth moved closer, droplets falling from her extended hand onto the journal. The drops formed words on the leather cover. Read it. I opened to the first page, dated April 18th, 1922. Elizabeth insists on swimming in that wretched lake, despite my objections. She claims it invigorates her, but I cannot help but worry. The water is treacherous, with hidden currents and sudden depths. I've forbidden the servants from allowing her near it without accompaniment, though she resents the restriction. She does not understand that I act only out of love and concern for her safety. I flipped forward, finding an entry from June 12, 1922. The wedding plans proceed, though Elizabeth grows more distant daily. Today I found her in the boathouse with Edwin Thornton, her cousin. They claimed to be reminiscing about childhood summers, but their guilty expressions told a different story. I've instructed the groundskeeper to board up the boathouse. Elizabeth need not know it was by my order. The watery figure of Elizabeth moved restlessly as I read, rivulets streaming down her form like tears. She gestured for me to continue. September 30th, 1922. The letters I intercepted confirmed my worst fears. Elizabeth plans to break our engagement and flee with Edwin. She will announce it tomorrow, thinking I know nothing of their scheme. She is mistaken. I've arranged a final boating excursion for us tonight, a romantic gesture, she believes. She'll understand too late that if I cannot have her, no one will. I looked up in horror. He murdered you. Elizabeth's watery form nodded, her features contorting with grief and rage. The final entry was dated October 1st, 1922. It is done. An unfortunate accident, the authorities concluded. Poor Elizabeth, overcome by the cold water when the boat capsized. How she struggled against my hands. How she pleaded. No one will ever know. I've burned the letters, paid off the maid whom I have suspected. Tomorrow I will begin the performance of the grieving fiancé. In time, perhaps, I will marry someone more deserving of the Westfield name and fortune. As I read the last words, Elizabeth's form began to change. The water darkened, as though filling with mud and silt. Her features sharpened, eyes becoming hollow pits, mouth stretching in a silent scream. She lunged toward me, hands reaching. I stumbled backward, dropping the journal, my flashlight clattering to the floor. In its rolling beam, I saw Elizabeth's form dissolve into a torrent that surged across the room, not toward me, but toward the portrait of William Westfield hanging on the wall. The water engulfed the painting, seeping into the canvas. As I watched, paralyzed, the portrait began to change. The dignified face of Lord William contorted in horror, the painted eyes widening, the mouth opening in a silent scream. Water seeped from the frame, running down the wall like blood. A howling wind tore through the room, though the windows remained closed. Papers from the desk swirled in the air. The temperature plunged so low that frost formed on the furniture, on the floor, climbing the walls like living things. From everywhere and nowhere came a woman's voice, Elizabeth's voice, no longer a whisper but a rage-filled shriek. Justice comes to liars, William. Even after death. Even after a century. The portrait on the wall began to blister and peel, the canvas rotting before my eyes as though submerged for decades. Lord William's painted face melted away, revealing something beneath, bones, or the suggestion of them, a skull grinning through the decomposing oils. I fled, slamming the door behind me, running blindly through the darkened west wing. Water pursued me, flooding the corridor, rising around my ankles. Hands seemed to grab at me from the surging tide, not just Elizabeth's, but others, many others, as though the lake had claimed more victims than history recorded. I reached the main hall, gasping for breath, only to find the entrance doors locked, immovable despite my frantic efforts. The water continued to rise, now at my knees, ice cold and smelling of rot and lilacs. A soft laugh echoed through the hall, Elizabeth, standing at the top of the grand staircase, her watery form now solid enough to appear almost human. She beckoned to me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" She pointed to my pocket, where I had placed the locket. With trembling hands, I removed it. "This? You want this?" She descended the stairs, water cascading around her, her eyes fixed on mine. When she reached me, she extended her hand. I placed the locket in her palm. Her fingers closed around it, solid for just an instant. She smiled, not the sad smile from her portrait, but something vengeful and satisfied. "Tell them," she whispered, her voice both in my ears and in my mind. "Tell them what he did." Then she dissolved, the water receding as quickly as it had appeared, draining away through invisible channels in the floor. The entrance doors swung open, letting in a gust of night air. I stood alone in the vast hall, soaked to the skin, shivering violently. In the distance, I heard the approach of a car, headlights swept across the windows as it came up the drive. Mrs. Reynolds entered moments later, her face pale. "Dr. Mitchell? Are you all right? You look," she stopped, taking in my drenched clothing, my wild expression. "I found Lord William's journal," I said, my voice hoarse. "I know what happened to Elizabeth Thornton." Mrs. Reynolds' eyes widened. "You've seen her." It wasn't a question. "Yes." She sighed, suddenly looking older. "They all do, eventually. Those who stay overnight. She shows them different things, different parts of the truth." "You knew?" I demanded. "About William, about what he did?" "Local gossip," she said softly. "My grandmother was a maid here when it happened. No one could prove anything, but..." She shook her head. "What will you do now?" I thought of the journal, still lying on the floor in William's study. Evidence of a century-old murder, preserved by whatever force had kept Elizabeth's spirit bound to this place. "Exactly what she asked me to do," I said. "Tell the truth." Later that night, as Mrs. Reynolds prepared a room for me in the caretaker's cottage, I refused to spend another night in the manor. I asked her about the music I'd heard. "Elizabeth played the piano," she explained. "Lord William had the music room sealed after her death. No one has entered it since." "And Edwin Thornton? Her cousin?" "He left England after her death. Couldn't bear to stay, knowing what had happened but unable to prove it. His descendants still live in the area. Your taxi driver is one of them." I thought of Edwin Thornton's concerned face as he dropped me off, his warning about staying too long. He had known, or suspected, what awaited me inside. As I finally drifted towards sleep in the small but blessedly normal bedroom of the cottage, I heard it one last time, the faint melody of a piano drifting from the direction of the manor. Not mournful now, but triumphant, like a celebration. In the morning, I would contact the police, the Historical Society, the press. Elizabeth Thornton's story would finally be told. William Westfield's reputation would crumble as his portrait had. Justice, even a century late, was still justice. But as I closed my eyes, a troubling thought surfaced. If Elizabeth's spirit remained because of unfinished business, would my actions finally release her? Or would she stay, bound to Westfield Manor by something stronger than vengeance, by love lost and betrayed, by a grief too profound to ever leave behind? The piano music faded, replaced by another sound, soft weeping, distant but distinct. Not triumphant after all, but mourning. Not for justice achieved, but for love forever lost. I woke disoriented, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a blissful moment, the events of the previous night seemed like a nightmare, something my mind had conjured from stress and isolation. Then I saw my clothes, still damp in places, draped over a chair to dry, and the reality crashed back. Mrs. Reynolds had prepared breakfast, her manner subdued as she set a plate before me. "Did you sleep well, Dr. Mitchell?" "Better than at the manor," I admitted, but my dreams had been troubled, fragments of drowning, of cold hands pulling me down into dark water. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I've called the police. They'll be here at 10. The local authorities arrived precisely on time. Inspector Holloway, a weathered man in his 50s, and Constable Peters, barely out of his 20s, clearly excited to be investigating something more interesting than the usual rural complaints. I led them through the manor to the west wing, to William's study where the journal still lay on the floor. As we entered the room, I noticed something strange. The portrait on the wall was intact, showing Lord William as he had appeared in life, with no trace of the horrific transformation I had witnessed. Inspector Holloway read the journal entries, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to grim acceptance. "If this is authentic, it's a confession to murder," he said, carefully placing the journal in an evidence bag. "We'll need to have the handwriting verified, compared to known samples of Lord Westfield's writing." "And the lake?" I asked. Elizabeth's remains would still be there. We'll organize a search, he assured me. Though after a century, there may not be much to find. As they prepared to leave, Constable Peters glanced around the study. Strange that this room is so well preserved compared to the rest of the wing. Almost like someone's been maintaining it. Mrs. Reynolds appeared in the doorway. Lord William's instructions. This room was to be kept exactly as he left it. The family insisted even after his death. When did Lord Westfield die? I asked, realizing I didn't know. November 1952, Mrs. Reynolds replied. 30 years to the day after Elizabeth's drowning. They found him here, in this room, at his desk. Heart failure, the doctor said. Inspector Holloway raised an eyebrow. Convenient timing. There was a storm that night, Mrs. Reynolds continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The lake flooded its banks. Water seeped into the house, all the way up to this room, though no other part of the manor was affected. They found him, drenched, as though he'd been submerged. A chill ran through me. You don't think it was heart failure? She met my eyes directly. I think some deaths can't be escaped, Dr. Mitchell. Not even in death. After the police left, I tried to return to my work, but found it impossible to concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to Elizabeth, to the watery figure that had led me to the truth. Had our discovery of William's confession freed her? Or was she still here, bound to the place of her death? I found myself drawn to her portrait in the long gallery. Unlike the previous day, I now noticed details I missed. The blue dress matched the description of what her ghost had worn, and around her neck was the silver locket, identical to the one I'd found in the boathouse. She was beautiful, a voice said behind me. I turned to find a man in his 60s, dressed in the rough clothing of a groundskeeper. Mr. Thornton? He nodded. Edwin Thornton Jr., you've met my son, who drives the taxi. I'm the gardener Mrs. Reynolds mentioned. He stepped closer, studying Elizabeth's portrait. She was my father's cousin and his first love. He never recovered from losing her. You know what happened, I said. It wasn't a question. My father knew. He tried to convince the authorities that William had murdered her, but a local magistrate against the word of the Lord? He shook his head. No contest in those days. Father left for America soon after, couldn't bear to stay. I was born there, only came back to England when I was 20. Felt drawn here, to the place where it all happened. And you became the groundskeeper at the very estate where your father's cousin was murdered? He gave me a sharp look. Someone had to keep watch. Make sure she wasn't forgotten. You've seen her, I realized. Elizabeth's ghost. Many times. First when I was a young man exploring the grounds. She led me to the boathouse, showed me the names carved there, hers and my father's, not hers and William's as the official story claimed. He hesitated. The police were here this morning. Something's changed. I found William's journal. He confessed everything, how he discovered their plan to elope, how he drowned her during a boat ride on the lake. Edwin's withered face showed complex emotions, grief, vindication, anger. After all these years, will they search the lake? They're organizing it now. He nodded slowly. Good. That's good. He turned to leave, then paused. Be careful, Dr. Mitchell. Finding Elizabeth's remains, exposing William's crime, it may not be enough for her. Some ghosts want more than justice. What do you mean? She's been here for a century, trapped between worlds. That kind of existence, it changes a soul. Warps it. His eyes were troubled. The Elizabeth my father loved was gentle, kind. What remains now may have forgotten those qualities. His warning stayed with me throughout the day. As evening approached, I decided to return to the lake, drawn by an impulse I couldn't explain. The police hadn't begun their search yet. The water lay undisturbed, mirroring the darkening sky. I followed the shore to the boathouse. Inside, I examined the wall carved names again. William and Elizabeth, forever, 1922. Below it, he lied. Now I understood. William had carved the first inscription, a false testament to a love that was already dead. Elizabeth, or perhaps her spirit, had added the second. As I traced the jagged letters, the temperature dropped precipitously. My breath fogged in the air. Behind me, water lapped against the boathouse pilings with increasing intensity, though there was no wind to disturb the lake's surface. I turned slowly, somehow knowing what I would see. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the water, more solid than before. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her pale face. The blue dress clung to her form, water streaming from the sodden fabric. Around her neck, the silver locket gleamed. Elizabeth, I said softly, we found the journal. The police know what William did to you. They'll search the lake, find your remains. You have justice now. She stared at me, her eyes dark pools that seemed to contain the depth of the lake itself. Slowly, she shook her head. Not enough? I asked, remembering Edwin's warning. What more do you need? She glided forward, her feet not quite touching the ground. When she was mere inches away, she reached out, her cold fingers brushing my cheek. Images flooded my mind, Elizabeth and Edwin, young and in love, planning their escape, William discovering their letters, the fateful boat ride, William's hands forcing her beneath the surface as she fought desperately, her last moments as water filled her lungs. I gasped, stumbling backward. I'm sorry, I whispered. It was horrible what he did to you. Her lips moved, forming words I could barely hear, not just me. What do you mean? She turned, pointing out across the lake. The water's surface began to ripple, though there was still no wind. Then, one by one, forms began to rise from the depths, translucent figures, men and women of different ages, all with the same haunted expressions. Some wore clothing from the early 20th century, others from later decades. My God, I breathed. He killed others? Elizabeth shook her head again. Then she pointed to William's name carved on the boathouse wall and made a slashing motion across it. His family? I guessed. The Westfields killed these people? She nodded, her expression grim. More images filled my mind, generations of Westfields, using their power and position to eliminate those who stood in their way. The lake had been their accomplice, swallowing the evidence of their crimes. How many? I asked, my voice barely audible. Elizabeth held up her hands, fingers spread. 10. Then again, 20. Then again. 30 people? Over how long? She made a sweeping gesture, indicating a vast span of time. And you've all been here, trapped. The realization was horrifying. The manor, the grounds, it's a prison for all of you. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a century of suffering. What can I do? I asked. How can I help free you? Elizabeth's form began to fade, becoming more transparent. She pointed to the manor, then to me, then made a writing gesture. The records, I understood. You want me to find evidence of the other victims. She nodded, then dissolved completely, leaving only a puddle of water on the boathouse floor. The other spectral figures sank back into the lake, the surface becoming still once more. I returned to the manor, my mind reeling from what I'd learned. Not just one murder, but dozens, committed by the Westfield family over generations. Elizabeth was only the most recent, the one whose spirit was strong enough to seek justice not just for herself, but for all the forgotten victims. Mrs. Reynolds was waiting when I entered, her expression tense. You went to the lake. Yes. Elizabeth showed me. I stopped, studying her face. You know, don't you? About the others. She looked away. There have always been rumors. Missing servants, local girls who caught a young lord's eye, business rivals who opposed the family's interests. People disappeared over the years. Many were last seen near Westfield Manor. And no one investigated? No one connected the disappearances? The Westfields were powerful, Dr. Mitchell. They owned half the county, employed most of the town. Who would dare accuse them? She sighed heavily. Besides, the disappearances happened over decades, generations. It was easy to dismiss each as an isolated incident. I need to see the family records, I said. Estate ledgers, journals, correspondence, anything that might contain evidence of the other victims. Mrs. Reynolds hesitated. Most of those would be in the family archive, in the cellar. It hasn't been opened in years. Show me. The cellar was accessed through a heavy door in the kitchen, locked with an old iron key that Mrs. Reynolds retrieved from a drawer. The stone steps descended into darkness, the air becoming colder with each step. At the bottom, she unlocked another door, revealing a large room lined with shelves and cabinets. The Westfield Archives, she said, switching on a single bare bulb that cast harsh shadows across the space. 400 years of family history. I spent hours in that cellar, sifting through ledgers, journals, and letters. The task was daunting, searching for evidence of murders concealed across centuries. But gradually, patterns emerged. Estate records showed servants who were suddenly dismissed without explanation, their final wages paid but no record of where they went. Family journals contained veiled references to problems resolved and obstacles removed. Correspondence mentioned local people who had left the area abruptly. Most damning were the private journals of various Westfield patriarchs, each containing cryptic entries that, read with knowledge of their true nature, clearly referenced murders. William's grandfather wrote of a troublesome tenant who took an unfortunate midnight swim. His father noted that a persistent creditor had found peace beneath the waters. The lake was their killing ground, generation after generation. By midnight, I had compiled a list of 34 potential victims, spanning from 1780 to 1952, the year of William's death. I brought my findings to Mrs. Reynolds, who had waited upstairs. All these people, she murmured, scanning the list. All these lives. I need to take this to the police, I said. They'll need to search the entire lake, not just for Elizabeth's remains. She nodded slowly. It won't be easy to prove. Most of these murders happened too long ago for anyone to be held accountable. It's not about punishment anymore, I replied. It's about acknowledgement. Recognition. These people deserve to be remembered, to have their deaths recognized as crimes, not accidents or disappearances. I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. After Mrs. Reynolds retired to her cottage, I returned to my study in the East Wing to organize my notes. The manor was eerily quiet, as though holding its breath. At precisely midnight, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me. The pages on my desk ruffled in a non-existent breeze. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, more solid than I had ever seen her. Behind her stood other figures, some of the spirits from the lake, now visible within the manor's walls. They filed into my study, forming a semicircle around me, their translucent forms flickering like candle flames. I found the evidence, I told them, gesturing to my notes. I'll take it to the police tomorrow. They'll search the lake, find your remains, identify you if they can. Elizabeth stepped forward, placing her cold hand over mine. Again, images filled my mind, but these were different. I saw the manor in flames, consumed by fire that started in the West Wing and spread throughout the entire structure. I saw the lake drained, its bed exposed to daylight for the first time in centuries, revealing the secrets it had kept. I pulled back, alarmed. You want me to burn down Westfield Manor? I can't do that. It's a historical treasure, irreplaceable. Elizabeth's eyes hardened. The other spirits moved closer, their expressions pleading, desperate. There must be another way, I insisted. Legal means, proper channels. Elizabeth shook her head vehemently. She pointed to my list, then swept her arm to indicate the spirits behind her, then made a gesture encompassing the entire manor. The message was clear. The building itself was part of their prison, as much as the lake was. The temperature dropped further. Frost formed on the windows, spreading across the glass in feathery patterns. The spirits began to change, their forms becoming less human, more elemental, water and ice given temporary shape, containing centuries of rage and suffering. They surrounded me, their cold auras piercing through me like physical pain. Elizabeth remained in front, her face transforming, mouth stretching too wide, eyes becoming hollow pits, skin taking on a bluish tinge of prolonged submersion. Free U.S., her voice echoed in my mind, joined by others, a chorus of the drowned. Burn it all. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair. I can't commit arson. There must be another solution. The spirits pressed closer. Water began seeping from the walls, pooling on the floor, rising around my ankles. The cold was unbearable now, a bone-deep chill that threatened to stop my heart. Please, I gasped, give me time. Let me think. Elizabeth's transformed face was inches from mine, her breath the smell of lake water and decay. In no more time came the mental shout. Centuries enough. The other spirits swirled around us, their forms melding into a vortex of water and mist. The manor groaned, woodwork creaking as moisture penetrated its structure. Books on the shelves swelled and burst, paintings blistered, metal fixtures began to rust before my eyes. In that moment, I understood they didn't need me to set a fire. They were destroying Westfield Manor themselves, using the very element that had claimed their lives. Water would rot the foundation, collapse the walls, erase this monument to generations of murderers. But they needed something from me. Elizabeth pointed to my notes, to the list of victims. You want me to save the evidence, I realized. To make sure your stories aren't lost when the manor is gone. She nodded, the monstrous aspect of her face softening slightly. I'll do it, I promised. I'll make sure everyone knows what happened here, who you were, what was done to you. The pressure in the room eased slightly. The water stopped rising, though it didn't recede. Elizabeth's form stabilized, becoming more human again. But I need to leave, I said firmly. Now. with the evidence. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. The spirits parted, creating a path to the door. As I gathered my notes with trembling hands, Elizabeth pointed to the window. Outside, I could see Mrs. Reynolds hurrying across the grounds toward the manor, a flashlight bobbing in the darkness. She must have seen the lights, sensed that something was happening. "She can't come in here," I said. "It's not safe." Elizabeth's expression remained impassive. I wasn't sure if they would spare Mrs. Reynolds, who had, in her way, been complicit in maintaining the manor and its secrets. I rushed from the room, down the stairs, reaching the entrance hall just as Mrs. Reynolds opened the front door. "Dr. Mitchell, what's happening?" "The windows, they're covered in ice, and there's water everywhere." I grabbed her arm, pulling her back outside. "We need to leave. Now. The manor isn't safe." "What do you mean? What have you done?" "Not me," I said, guiding her firmly toward her cottage. "Them. The spirits. They're reclaiming Westfield Manor." She resisted. "But the estate, it's my responsibility." "It's their tomb," I countered. "And they're breaking free." Behind us, a tremendous groan echoed through the night, the sound of ancient timbers giving way, of stone cracking under pressure. We turned to see water gushing from every window of the west wing, a torrent that seemed impossible, as though the lake itself was emptying into the manor. "Dear God," Mrs. Reynolds whispered. "Call the police," I told her. "Tell them we need emergency services. But keep everyone away from the building." As she fumbled for her phone, I looked back at the manor. Silhouetted in an upper window stood Elizabeth, watching us. For a brief moment, she appeared as she must have in life, young, beautiful, full of thwarted potential. Then she dissolved, joining the water that was consuming Westfield Manor from within. By dawn, emergency crews had arrived, but there was little they could do. The west wing had collapsed entirely. The rest of the structure was compromised beyond repair. Engineers declared the manor unsalvageable. The foundation had been undermined by what they termed unexpected groundwater activity. The lake, when examined, was found to be significantly lower than its historical levels. Initial probing of its bed revealed what appeared to be human remains, many sets, scattered across the bottom, preserved in the cold, silty depths. Inspector Holloway found me sitting on a stone bench in what remained of the garden, watching as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the ruined manor. "You want to tell me what really happened here, Dr. Mitchell?" he asked, sitting beside me. I handed him my notes, the list of victims, the evidence I compiled from the family archives, saved from the manor's destruction. 34 people, I said quietly. Murdered by the Westfield family over generations, their bodies disposed of in the lake. Elizabeth Thornton was just the most recent. She's the one who revealed the truth. He flipped through the pages, his expression grave. "This is extensive. But how did you connect all these disappearances to the Westfields?" I met his gaze steadily. Elizabeth showed me. To his credit, he didn't scoff or dismiss me. "The ghost." "Yes." He looked toward the manor, where recovery teams were preparing to search the debris. "And the buildings collapse? Also are doing?" "All of them," I corrected. "All the victims, working together. The water from the lake, their grave, reclaiming the house that belonged to their killers." Holloway was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. "That won't be going in my official report." "I understand. But we will investigate these disappearances," he added, tapping my notes. and will conduct a thorough search of the lake. If there are remains to be found, we'll find them. Thank you. He stood to leave, then hesitated. One more thing, Dr. Mitchell. The caretaker, Mrs. Reynolds, she claimed she saw figures in the windows last night. Dozens of them, watching as the manor collapsed. He studied my face. Did you see them too? I remembered Elizabeth at the window, her final appearance before joining the water that destroyed her prison. Yes, I said simply. I saw them. Over the following months, the police investigation confirmed much of what I had discovered. The draining of the lake revealed the remains of 27 individuals, including Elizabeth Thornton, identifiable by dental records and a silver locket still clasped around what remained of her neck. Other victims were harder to identify, but DNA testing and historical records helped put names to most of them. My list proved remarkably accurate: servants who had disappeared, local women who had run away, business rivals who had moved unexpectedly. The Westfield family's legacy was irreparably tarnished. Historians and journalists descended on the area, eager to document what was being called one of the most extensive family murder conspiracies in British history. I remained in the village throughout the investigation, staying at the local inn. Each night, I dreamed of water, not violent or threatening now, but peaceful, cleansing. Sometimes Elizabeth appeared, her form human and at rest, the vengeance gone from her eyes, replaced by something like gratitude. 6 months after the manor's collapse, the lake had been fully drained and searched, the recovered remains properly interred in the village cemetery. A memorial was erected, listing the names of all the victims, with Elizabeth's at the top. On my last day in the village, before returning to London and my normal life, I visited the memorial. As I stood reading the names, Edwin Thornton Jr. approached, placing a bouquet of lilacs at the base of the stone. They say the architect wanted to use blue flowers in the design, he commented, but they all withered within hours of being placed. Only white ones survive. I looked at the memorial more closely, noticing the carved lily motifs. White flowers for peace. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. They've found them all now. Given them proper burials, recognition. That's what she wanted, in the end. For none of them to be forgotten. I hope they're at peace, I said softly. He smiled sadly. The villagers say the lake is different now. Calmer. People have started fishing there again, swimming in the summer. No one's done that for generations. And the manor grounds? Being turned into a public park, with the memorial at its center. He gestured toward the ruins, visible in the distance. They'll preserve part of the foundation as a historical site. The rest will return to nature. As we walked back toward the village, Edwin asked the question I'd been expecting. Have you seen her since that night? Elizabeth? I considered lying, but something told me he would understand the truth. In dreams, she seems at rest, different from how she was. He nodded. A soul can only contain so much rage before it either consumes itself or finds release. He looked toward the memorial again. They named it, you know. The new park. Thornton Gardens. After her. That seems fitting. That night, in my room at the inn, I dreamed of Elizabeth one final time. She stood by the lake, not the real lake as it was now, partially refilled after the investigation, but the lake as it had been in her time, pristine and surrounded by well-tended gardens. She wore the blue dress, but it was dry now, moving gently in a summer breeze. Her hair was styled as in her portrait, her face young and unburdened. Around her neck, The silver locket caught the sunlight. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and human. "For remembering us. For making them remember. Are you free now?" I asked. "All of you?" She smiled, glancing behind her where other figures stood in the distance, the other victims, no longer watery and vengeful, but solid and at peace. "Free enough," she answered. "The water no longer holds us." "Will I see you again?" "No," she said gently. "Our time here is done. The story is told." She turned to join the others, but paused, looking back one last time. "The past leaves traces, Dr. Mitchell. Some linger longer than others. But eventually, even the deepest waters clear." Then she was gone, and I was awake, dawn light filtering through the inn's curtains. On the bedside table lay a single white lily, its petals still wet with dew. I knew without touching it that it would be ice cold, a final message from a world beyond our own. I left the village that morning, returning to London and my work. I gave statements to police, historians, journalists, telling Elizabeth's story and the stories of all the other victims, ensuring they would not be forgotten again. Sometimes, on rainy nights, I think I hear piano music drifting through my apartment, a distant, melancholy melody that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. I don't fear it. It's just a trace, an echo of a past that has finally found its voice. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the lake, clear and still, reflecting a sky full of stars, no longer concealing its secrets, no longer a prison for the drowned. Free enough. For them and for me. 1 year after the events at Westfield Manor, I returned to London from an extended assignment in Edinburgh, cataloging the private collection of a Scottish duke. My flat felt foreign after months away, dusty, unlived in, the air stale and still. I opened windows, unpacked, tried to settle back into a routine that now seemed mundane after what I had experienced in Essex. That night, I dreamed of water again, not the violent, vengeful flood that had destroyed the manor, but a gentle rain falling on the memorial at Thornton Gardens. I woke to find my pillow damp, as though tears had been shed while I slept. The following morning, a package arrived. No return address, but the Essex postmark told me all I needed to know. Inside was a slim volume, William Westfield's journal, the one that had contained his confession to Elizabeth's murder. A note from Inspector Holloway explained that with the investigation concluded, the journal was being returned to me as the finder. I hadn't expected to see it again. The last time I'd held it, water had been rising around my ankles, spirits swirling in rage. Now it sat innocuously on my coffee table, its leather binding dried and cracked, its pages wavy from exposure to moisture. I should have placed it on a shelf and left it there, a memento of a closed case. Instead, I found myself opening it, turning past the entries I'd already read, deeper into William's life after Elizabeth's murder. December 25th, 1922, Christmas at the Manor is a somber affair this year. Mother insists on maintaining traditions, though there is little joy in them. I play my part as the grieving fiancé, accepting condolences with appropriate gravity. Only in private do I allow myself to feel relief. Elizabeth would have made a poor Lady Westfield, too headstrong, too common in her sensibilities despite her family's standing. The alliance with the Thorntons would have brought little advantage in the end. May 17, 1923, the lake calls to me in strange ways. I find myself walking at short odd hours, drawn by what I tell myself is merely the desire to ensure no evidence remains. But there is something else, a feeling of being watched from beneath the surface. Foolish fancy, nothing more. The entries continued, spanning months, then years. William's growing paranoia, his insistence that he could hear piano music at night, his conviction that Elizabeth's portrait was changing, the eyes following him around the room. His marriage in 1925 to the daughter of a viscount, a union that brought prestige but little affection. The birth of a son in 1927, described with disturbing detachment. Then, a troubling entry from June 1930, the new maid, Ellen, has been asking questions about the boathouse. Claims she saw a woman in a blue dress standing there at dusk. Too curious by half. I've instructed Harrison to dismiss her with a suitable reference to ensure she leaves the area. I check my list of suspected victims. Ellen Matthews, maid, disappeared July 1930. Her body had been among those recovered from the lake. William had continued killing long after Elizabeth. August 1930, it is done. The lake has claimed another secret. Ellen will trouble us no more with her tales of ghosts and her prying questions. Harrison disposed of her things as instructed, sent a letter to her family in her hand, skillfully forged, explaining her sudden decision to seek employment in London. All is quiet again, except for the piano music. It grows louder each night. Margaret, his wife, claims not to hear it, but I see the lie in her eyes. The servants whisper. Even Harrison seems uneasy, though he remains loyal. The journal detailed more murders, a gardener in 1935 who discovered bones while dredging the lake's edge, a local journalist in 1940 investigating rumors about the Westfield family, William's own valet in 1947, who had apparently walked in on him burning letters from Elizabeth found hidden in a secret compartment of his desk. With each killing, William's mental state deteriorated. His handwriting became more erratic, his thoughts more disjointed. He described seeing Elizabeth everywhere, standing at the foot of his bed, sitting at the piano, walking the shore of the lake. Sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by the others, as he called them. The final entry was dated October 31st, 1952, the day before his death. They are all here now. All of them. Elizabeth leads them, more beautiful and terrible than in life. They stand around my bed at night, dripping water onto the floors. The servants claim they see nothing, hear nothing, but I know they lie. Harrison alone admits the truth. He has seen them too, in the West Wing, in the corridors, gathered in the music room where a piano stands untouched since that day. Tonight they spoke to me for the first time. Not in whispers as before, but clearly, directly. Tomorrow, they said in unison. Tomorrow you join us. Elizabeth stepped forward, held out her hand as though an invitation or command. Water poured from her fingers, soaking my bed sheets, chilling me to the bone. I have locked myself in my study. Ordered Harrison to admit no one, regardless of what he may hear. I have my revolver. If they come for me, I will not go easily into their cold embrace. Even as I write this, I hear them, the soft splash of footsteps in the corridor, the gentle turning of the doorknob. The key will keep them out. It must. The piano music has begun again. Her favorite sonata. And beneath it, a new sound, like water rising, flooding, seeking entry. The door cannot hold against such a force. No door can. They are here. The entry ended abruptly, a jagged line trailing from the final word as though the pen had been violently jerked away. The remaining pages were blank. I closed the journal, disturbed by this new revelation. William had not been the only murderer in the Westfield line, but he had continued the family tradition even after experiencing Elizabeth's haunting. His fear had not been enough to stop him from adding more victims to the lake's dark inventory. That evening, I received a call from Edwin Thornton Jr. "I thought you should know," he said without preamble. "They've found more remains." My heart sank. "Where?" "Not in the lake. In the manor ruins. They'd been clearing the site for the new park, and they discovered a sealed room in what was left of the foundation, hidden behind a false wall." "How many?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "3. Women, the pathologist thinks. Very old, perhaps turn of the century or earlier. Before William's time." I thought of the journal entries, the generations of Westfields using the manor as their killing ground. His father's victims, perhaps. Or his grandfather's. "There's something else," Edwin continued, his voice hesitant. "They found items with the remains. Personal effects." "What kind of items?" "Jewelry mostly. Lockets, rings, bracelets. And sheet music. Water damaged but recognizable. Piano compositions." A chill ran through me. "Elizabeth Sonata." "You knew?" William's journal mentioned it. The music she played that haunted him after her death. Edwin was silent for a moment. "They're reopening the investigation, expanding it to include these new victims. Detective Holloway asked if you might return to Essex to provide context for the journal's entries. I should have refused. I had a new assignment waiting, a normal life to reclaim. But I knew I would go back. The story wasn't complete yet. Tell him I'll be there tomorrow." Essex in autumn was beautiful in a melancholy way, trees shedding their leaves, fields lying fallow, the sky a pale gray that seemed to absorb sound as well as light. The village had changed subtly in my absence. A new shop on the high street, a refurbished pub, a general air of renewal that I hadn't noticed during my previous stay. Inspector Holloway met me at the train station, his withered face breaking into a smile. "Dr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd want to revisit this case. Some stories don't let you walk away until they're fully told," I replied, shaking his hand. He nodded in understanding. "We've set up an incident room at the village hall. The manor site is still an active crime scene. The hall had been transformed into a makeshift investigation headquarters with photographs, timelines, and maps covering the walls. Officers and forensic technicians moved between tables laden with evidence bags and reports. Holloway led me to a separate room where the recovered items from the hidden chamber were displayed. 3 sets of remains had yielded 3 collections of personal effects, each telling the fragment of a story cut violently short. The first victim appeared to have been a music teacher. Her possessions included a tarnished silver locket containing a miniature photograph of a young woman seated at a piano, a mother-of-pearl hair comb, and several sheets of handwritten music. "Amelia Winters," Holloway explained. "Employed by the Westfield family in 1878 to teach piano to the daughters. Reported missing in December of that year. The family claimed she had returned to London for the holidays and never came back." The second victim's belongings were simpler: a plain gold wedding band, a small devotional book, and a folded letter addressed to "My dearest Thomas." We believe she was Mary Cooper, a housemaid. Her husband reported her missing in 1882. The Westfield suggested she had run off with a delivery man. The third collection was the most elaborate, an ornate jewelry box containing pearl earrings, a diamond brooch, and a miniature portrait of a distinguished-looking gentleman. Also, a leather-bound diary with a brass lock. "Lady Caroline Blackwood," Holloway said, watching my reaction. "Wife of Lord Henry Westfield, William's grandfather. Supposedly left the manor after a scandal involving a stable hand. never seen again after 1885. They killed their own family members, I murmured, staring at the portrait. William's grandfather murdered his wife and concealed her remains in the manor itself, rather than disposing of them in the lake. Perhaps he feared discovery. Her disappearance would have caused more comment than his servants. I examined the diary. Have you opened this? The lock was rusted shut. We didn't want to damage it further without consulting you first, given your expertise in historical artifacts. I nodded, retrieving the small toolkit I always carried. With careful manipulation, the lock yielded without breaking. The diary's pages were fragile, the ink faded but legible. May I? I asked, gesturing to a pair of cotton gloves on the table. Holloway nodded. Please. I turned the pages slowly, scanning entries that began as mundane accounts of high society life and gradually transformed into something far darker. March 12, 1885. Henry's moods worsened daily. The servants walk in fear of his temper. Yesterday he struck young Thomas merely for dropping a teacup. I intervened, which only redirected his rage toward me. The bruises on my arms will require long sleeves for a fortnight at least. April 30th, 1885. I have discovered the most dreadful thing. The ledgers Henry thought securely hidden reveal outgoing payments to families of young women who have left service at the manor. Cross-referencing with staff records shows at least 7 such departures in the past 3 years. Yet I have never seen these women leave. When I mentioned one, Jane, I believe her name was, to Mrs. Winters, the music teacher, she grew pale and changed the subject immediately. May 17, 1885, Mrs. Winters has confided in me. She says she has seen things, Henry and his valet Harrison taking late-night journeys to the lake, carrying what appeared to be heavy bundles. She believes the missing girls may have met with foul play. I cannot bring myself to believe such horror of my husband, yet his rages, his secrecy, his midnight absences. June 3rd, 1885. I confronted Henry today with what I know, what I suspect. It was foolish, I see that now. He did not rage as I expected. Instead, he grew very calm, very cold. Said I was clearly unwell, imagining lurid fantasies. Suggested I might benefit from time away from the manor, perhaps at his sister's home in Bath. I do not trust this sudden solicitude. Tonight I will speak with Mrs. Winters again. We must plan carefully. The final entry was dated June 5, 1885. Henry knows I have been speaking with Mrs. Winters. She failed to appear for Eliza's lesson today. When I inquired, Harrison informed me she had been called away on family business. The same excuse given for the others who disappeared. I am not safe here. Tomorrow I will flee to my brother's estate inn. The entry ended mid-sentence. Lady Caroline had never finished her thought, never escaped the manor, never reached her brother's protection. She knew, I said softly. She discovered what her husband was doing and tried to expose him. So she became a victim too. Along with the music teacher who helped her, Holloway added. This diary is evidence of a cover-up stretching back at least to the 1880s. Much longer, I suspect. William's journal suggested the lake had been used by generations of Westfields. There could be dozens more victims we haven't found yet. Holloway ran a hand through his graying hair. The family properties extended well beyond the manor and its immediate grounds. We're using ground-penetrating radar to search for additional burial sites, but it's slow work. What about the Westfield descendants? I asked. Surely there must be family members still living. The direct line ended with William's son, who died childless in 1980. There are distant cousins scattered across England and abroad, but none who maintain ties with Westfield Manor after it was donated to the Historical Trust. I thought of Elizabeth's words from my dream, the past leaves traces. Some of those traces were physical, bodies, artifacts, journals. Others were more intangible, ripples of tragedy extending through time, touching lives generations later. I'd like to visit the manor site, I said. And the memorial. Holloway seemed unsurprised by the request. I'll take you myself. Thornton Gardens was taking shape around the ruins of the manor. Workers were constructing pathways, planting trees, creating a space of remembrance and reflection rather than fear. The memorial stood at the center, a simple stone obelisk inscribed with the names of the confirmed victims, space left for others still to be identified. New names had been added since my last visit: Amelia Winters, Mary Cooper, Lady Caroline Blackwood. As we approached, I noticed fresh flowers placed at the base, white lilies and blue forget-me-nots. The villagers maintain it, Holloway explained. There's a rotation. Someone brings flowers daily. Blue flowers, I noted. I thought they wouldn't survive here. They don't, usually. These were placed this morning. By tomorrow they'll be wilted, their vibrant blue fading to a ghostly white. It's been happening consistently since the memorial was erected. Blue flowers transformed overnight, as though the spirits still exert their influence even in peace. Holloway and I stood in contemplative silence before the memorial. The autumn breeze carried the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, reminiscent of the lake that had held its secrets for so long. There's something else you should see, Holloway said finally, leading me toward what remained of the manor's west wing. The excavation had revealed the foundations of the hidden room where the 3 women's remains had been discovered. Beyond it, workers had uncovered another chamber, smaller and deeper beneath the earth. We found this yesterday, Holloway explained as we approached a temporary shelter erected over the site. It appears to be some kind of archive or record room. Inside the shelter, archaeologists were carefully removing documents from a metal box that had somehow survived both water damage and the collapse of the building above it. William's grandfather kept records, Holloway said quietly. Meticulous ones. He handed me a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed but legible. Unlike the accounting books Lady Caroline had mentioned in her diary, this was no financial record. It was a catalog of murder, names, dates, methods, and motives detailed with disturbing precision. Lord Henry Westfield documented everything, Holloway continued. Not just his victims, but those of his father and grandfather before him. The earliest entry dates to 1802. I leafed through the pages, stunned by the scale of what we were uncovering. Over 150 years of systematic killing, and a family tradition of sorts. Each Westfield heir was initiated into the practice upon reaching adulthood. Those who refused. Holloway pointed to an entry that made my blood run cold. Terence Westfield, second son, refused participation. Disposed of December 12, 1871. Lake burial. They killed their own family members who wouldn't participate, I whispered. Maintaining the secret was paramount. The ledger includes detailed instructions for each new generation, how to select victims, how to dispose of remains, how to craft cover stories. But why? I asked. What possible reason could justify this? Holloway hesitated. The final pages of the ledger contain what appears to be a family covenant of sorts. It references a pact made by Bartholomew Westfield in 1787, a bargain for prosperity and power that demanded regular sacrifice. A cult, I said flatly. They believed they were feeding something. Or someone. Holloway's expression was grim. The covenant mentions a presence in the lake, an entity that granted the family their fortune in exchange for regular offerings. I thought of the spirits that had destroyed the manor, their watery forms, their centuries of rage. Had they been sacrifices to a delusion, or was there something more sinister beneath the surface of the Westfield legacy? As if reading my thoughts, Holloway added, "Of course, there's no evidence of anything supernatural. Just generations of a family committing murder under the guise of a dark ritual." We left the excavation site as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grounds. At the memorial, the blue forget-me-nots were already beginning to pale, their edges turning white. "What happens now?" I asked. "We continue identifying victims, giving names to the nameless, bringing what justice we can after all this time." Holloway gazed toward the lake, now peaceful in the golden evening light. "The Thornton Gardens project will proceed. This place deserves a new chapter." That night, in my room at the Village Inn, I dreamed of Elizabeth again. She stood by the memorial, touching the newly added names with gentle fingers. "We found them," I told her. "We know why." She nodded, her expression serene. "Not all mysteries need solving. Some need only acknowledgement." Was there something in the lake? I couldn't help asking. Something the Westfields were feeding? Elizabeth smiled enigmatically. "There is always something in the dark water, whether put there by men or by forces beyond their understanding. The difference is in who controls the narrative." She gestured to the memorial. "Now it's our story, not theirs." When I woke, a single white lily lay on my pillow, its petals still holding the chill of the lake. Outside my window, I could see Thornton Gardens bathed in morning light, the memorial standing tall amidst new growth, a testament to lives reclaimed from obscurity. I returned to London the following day with the knowledge that some cases never truly close. The Westfield murders would continue to yield secrets, names would be added to the memorial, and history would be rewritten by those once silenced. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear distant piano music, Elizabeth's sonata, played with delicate precision. I no longer try to determine if it's memory or something more. Some questions are better left unanswered, some boundaries better left unbreached. Yet I keep a vase of white lilies on my desk, changed weekly. And occasionally, when no one is watching, I place a single blue forget-me-not among them, a small reminder that even the deepest waters eventually yield their secrets, and that those who were once drowned can find their way to the surface, their stories finally told. In the village near what was once Westfield Manor, they say the lake is kinder now, its waters clear and welcoming. Children swim there in summer, untroubled by the history beneath the surface. The memorial stands as both warning and reconciliation, the past acknowledged but no longer in control. Elizabeth and the others have found their peace, and in doing so, granted it to those who remember them. Not vengeance, in the end, but truth, the most powerful liberation of all. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.